Magandang hapon, Mr. President, and it will be a privilege to yield to the Minority Leader. Of course, I'd like to thank the present chairperson of the committee, Senator 𝗕𝗥𝗚𝗙𝗢, for allowing me to continue. This is a special bill for me for two reasons, Mr. President. You know, I really believe that the Lord works in mysterious but in wondrous ways. I was always amazed when I was a child when my dad would tell me na, alam mo ba ang Singapore fishing village yan nung bata kami. And when you say Singapore, hindi mo ma-imagine na in one lifetime, from a fishing village, you become one of the, if not the best city-states in the world na sa lahat ng index ng quality of life, nangunguna sila. But recently, a friend, former ARTA Secretary 𝗙𝗢𝗢𝗪𝗡, showed a picture in Singapore of Fort Bonifacio in the late 90s or in 2000, and the picture of Fort Bonifacio in 2023. And na-realize ko na in half a lifetime or in half a generation, in 20 years, lubusan nagbago ang aming syudad. And part of this is because of the initiative of President Ramos to privatize the bases. And I wish that Subic, Clark, La Union, Baguio, or anywhere where there is military bases, and there are different degrees of success. But yung success po ng BGC, may mga elements dyan na wala po sa Clark. And one of those elements is yung land ownership. At kung tutusin, Mr. President, napakaganda ng airport ng Clark. Ang Central Luzon ay napakayaman. So, you know, with all my heart, it is a privilege to be a sponsor of this bill. And with all my heart, I thank the BCDA, I thank our former presidents for the opportunity to push for this. No? So with that, Mr. President, I yield to the Minority Leader for some questions. And I'd like to thank him for the interest he had in this legislative proposal.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the permission of our sponsor, the BCDA plays a critical role in the funding of our military, Mr. President. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. President. So meron pong sa original BCDA law, then this was amended, meron pong mga percentage ng pinupuntahan po ng income po, lalo po nung sale ng properties po ng BCDA.
Pero sa ngayon po, tumutulong pa ba ang BCDA sa AFP modernization program?
The short answer is yes. The BCDA president will be here in a minute. Short answer po yes. So alam ko po napakalaki ng kanilang corporate income. So pagka-sale po nung land, wala silang choice dahil meron po silang under the law, meron specific amount na due to the military. Otherwise po, dividends that goes directly to the treasury. No? Yes. Meron bang directly to the military from the corporate? Anong tulong niyo sa military aside from that? They'll direction.
Yung mga applications sa applications.
Lease na.
These give you first.
So, Mr. President, to be exact, pag may sale po, 37.5% goes to the military. Pag may lease, 50%. Then any income of BCDA, and they've been doing quite well from the inception, napupunta sa Bureau of Treasury. Pero isa po din sa ginagawa ng BCDA is that pag may facilities ang military na kinuha for sale, sila na rin po namamahala ng pag-replicate ng mga kailangan ng military. No? Actually, makikita natin to sa New Senate building kasi pagmamayari ng Navy, no? Pamamahala ng Navy, and that was or is part of Fort Bonifacio, Taguig. No?
This responsibility to fund the needs of our military will not be touched, Mr. President.
No, in fact, it will be enhanced because right now, they're only allowed lease. So although mas malaki yung percentage ng lease, 50%, mas mababa yung income sa lease. Pero when they're allowed to sell, mas malaki nga ang mapupunta sa military ngayon.
So the bill under consideration includes now the power to dispose by sale.
Yes.
Wala-
Only 5% nung present sa Clark ngayon, and then possibly another 5%. So not more than 10% ang papayagan pong for sale. Ang main reason ito, Mr. Minority Leader, Mr. President, and we already mentioned this. Personally, I was involved in advocating this when I was Secretary of Foreign Affairs. Ang nangyari po kasi, Mr. President, namili yung mga developers sa labas ng Clark. And for some of the wealthier, it's okay, whether inside, outside. But for example, yung workers, nagrerenta sila. And kung masyadong controlled yung market inside, sa labas, medyo traffic na rin. So actually, nakinabang ng husto din ang mga private business dun sa labas ng Clark. And before the SEA Games, hindi pa ganun ka-traffic, pero ngayon medyo grabe na ang traffic. So selling within the camp, within the Clark, as long as it is limited to this 5 plus 5%, I think will be a win-win-win. No? Win for the workers, for the investors, for the BCDA, for Clark, no? And also for some light industries. So magkakaroon ng kompetensya ang Clark International Airport in the next 5 to 10 years dun sa Bulacan Airport. So, and to be fair to BCDA or to congratulate them, they've attracted some very good investors katulad nung Singapore FedEx, Singapore Airlines. No, so of course, if they're able to offer also some land in the area, then Clark will also be an option aside from Bulacan Airport. And when we did the law about the economic zone in Bulacan, many of the senators said that the market is big enough for both the Bulacan Airport and the Clark International Airport. So we're just going to make it a little bit more conducive for investors if they want to stay in Clark, or make it conducive for those who are selling or yung road shows ng Clark around the world na i-consider na yung Clark.
We are amending RA number 7227 as amended. So, but under this law, the remaining corporate life of BCDA is still 19 years. Is that correct, Mr. President?
Yes, 18 years, Mr. President.
18 years na lang, nabawasan na ng 1 year. But from practice, most of the GOCCs going to Congress calling for or are requesting for the renewal or extension of their corporate term when they are already just 5 years into the end of their original term, Mr. President. So, isn't this too early, Mr. President, or too anticipatory of something, Mr. President, that 19 years before the end of life, we are already asking that the life be extended, Mr. President?
Mr. President, I'll be very frank with the minority leader and our colleagues because I owe that to you. Hindi naman po life or death yung provision na to, no? Yung pag-amend nung sa corporate life. But as former chairman of the Committee on GOCCs, I took a look, no? Iilan lang kasi GOCCs na talagang consistently parating positive yung income at saka malaki magbigay ng dividendo sa gobyerno. The very few, of course, include Land Bank and DBP. And yung iba na successful pero hindi rin nagdidividendo, no? And yung isang alas or isang asset ng BCDA is actually yung pagli-lease nila ng lupa eh. And usually ang lease nila is 25 or 50 years. So it just doesn't up to 75 years, Mr. President. So it just doesn't make sense to some of the investors pagka nagro-roadshow na magpapalis ka ng 50, 75 years pero 18 years ka na lang. So syempre may question din yung iba. What if your government suddenly does not want to renew the corporate life. Of course, may mga sagot naman tayo dyan, di ba? I mean, if and when that time comes that the Philippine government says mag-transition na, meron naman magiging authority yan. But as we know, relationships matter.
May sasalo.
May sasalo niyan.
May sakali yan.
But yung investor kasi, ang importante, hindi lang anong korporasyon niya, but sinong kausap namin, di ba? And as a juridical entity, may may pangalan na internationally yung BCDA, may credibility. So it will just be much better for them, for the military, for their constituents if this early meron tayong vote of confidence sa kanila and they will have 68 more years instead of 18 years. So pag nagpalis sila ng 25, 50 years, it's within their corporate life. In fact, the Senate President just filed a bill allowing a 99-year lease. No? So again, if we pass that bill, and I hope we do, medyo awkward ng konti na magpapalis ka ng 99 years pero 18 years ka na lang. No? So again, Mr. President, this is not a make or break provision, but we hope we will, and you specifically, and we as a body, Mr. President, will consider it. But I'll be open during the period of amendment if the Senate President has a counter proposal. Because the heart of this bill is really allowing the sale of 5 plus 5% of the especially Clark and 𝗙𝗢𝗢𝗧 and Poro Point.
And that heart of the amendments is found in section what, Mr. President? Of the bill.
Section 3, Mr. President.
Section 3.
Opo.
Okay, so which is about section 18 and is this the one on page 4, line 6? The conversion authority is hereby authorized to sell? Is that the main
So section
amendment?
3, a new section designated as section 18 is hereby inserted after section 17 of RA 27 as amended. So yeah. So page 4, line 6.
Yes.
The conversion authority is hereby authorized to sell the lands
Yes,
immediately preceding paragraph. Yes.
Sige po. So,
Sorry, Mr. President, I was using a different version, annotated version. Kaya,
okay, can we now talk about the lands in the immediately preceding paragraph? So,
Yes.
Number 1, page 3, line 3, that would be number 1, Clark Special Economic Zone. Number 2, Poro Point Freeport Zone. Number 3, Bataan Technology Park. Number 4, 𝗙𝗢𝗢𝗓 Special Economic Zone. So, yan po yun.
Opo,
Yan lang
yan
yun.
po,
So,
Mr. President. Yan po.
the authority to sell given to the conversion authority would be limited to the 4.
Yes, Mr. President.
And then
Because, Mr. President, yung sa Pasay at saka sa Taguig, from the start kasi allowed na ibenta yon eh. So ang naging wisdom nung 1992, etong iba, i-list na lang natin. So it's been a 8 plus 32-year experiment na rin eh. So may mga findings na rin over time. Pero binalansi pa rin natin. Instead of wholesale, okay magbenta, payagan na natin silang lahat, we limited it to 5%. But given na nga na the Bulacan Airport is expected to be very successful, we saw it fit na 5 plus 5 if kailangan, but not more than 10% po yan.
so what is the classification of the land found in Clark Special Economic Zone right now, as of the moment?
It's anong next din dito?
Patrimonya. Right now, it's considered patrimonial land. So hindi siya alienable and disposable.
But as to classification, ano po siya? Di ba ang classification natin parang forest,
Agro-industrial po.
agro-industrial. But what makes it not alienable and disposable? A specific provision of law?
Yeah, the law, the 1992 BCDA law, so since it was a military camp, the 1992 law said which camps can be sold and which ones can be developed pero cannot be sold.
So parang ano na to, parang nagbago na ng isip natin after the passage of time, pwede na.
Yes.
We will now-
After the experience with the Villamor Air Base and then the Fort Bonifacio, formerly McKinley, Fort McKinley, nakita po natin na, so for example, Mr. President, I dare say, kung bawal magbenta ng lupa sa Fort Bonifacio, BGC will not be BGC. As it is now, no? So, ang ginawa naman po nila doon, hindi sale but then may joint venture. FBDC is actually a joint venture between BCDA and the Ayala Group, no? So, may interest pa rin ng gobyerno. So, but in the case of Clark, napakalayo naman po kasi ng, I think Fort Bonifacio is a total of 600 ba? 500, almost 600 hectares, while Clark is 35,000 hectares, no? Oh, so malayo din naman, Mr. President. And of course, BGC, I mean Fort Bonifacio was in the heart or in the South Metro Manila, malapit sa Manila and Makati na financial centers natin. Ang Clark noon, may activities na dun sa luma, pero yung New Clark City, ano lang yan the last decade na lang talaga ng nabuhay talaga.
So thank you for that, Mr. President. Can I now bring the attention of our sponsor to Section 2, found on page 2, starting on line 10, which is about the capitalization.
So
It reads like this way, Mr. President. Section 6, capitalization. The conversion authority shall have an authorized capital of 200 billion pesos, which may be fully subscribed by the Republic of the Philippines and shall be funded by the conversion authority either in cash or property. So how does that work, Mr. President?
Yes. Well, Mr. President, as we've learned in law school, di ba, yung capitalization kasi, tinitignan din ng mga kadil mo yan, di ba? So, magkano ang capital mo? So, medyo unique ang BCDA kasi yung iba nating mga bills dito or yung mga dumadaan sa executive, humihingi either sa JA or humihingi sa ibang GFIs ng pangkapital. So, actually dito, lumaki ang BCDA and they've been doing well. So, they're gonna use yung pera din nila. So, basically lang, instead of doing this through SEC, if this was a purely private corporation, they would just file, di ba? So meaning if any private corporation, Cayetano and Pimentel joint venture, nag-start tayo ng 50 million, kumita, we want to increase the capitalization to 1 billion. But ito, instead of going to SEC, sa atin pumunta, and it's basically just a, sign to all of the investors, partners, etc. na we have the money, maganda yung pagpapatakbo ng company and everything. No?
Pero ito ba, the conversion authority pays in cash, either in cash or property, for the shares which will now be named under the Republic of the Philippines? Ganun po yung mangyayari.
Okay. So what will happen is they will sell the shares sa capitalization, di ba? So the proceeds of the lands, ipangbibili nila ng part of equity. Okay. And then the shares itself will be in the name of the Republic of the Philippines. So yung iba nilang properties will be part ng equity. And then pwede nyo ibenta yung 5% nung land ngayon sa...
Then the land that we are envisioning to be sold are right now titled under whose name, Mr. President?
Republic of the Philippines.
It's now under BCDA as their asset. Hindi siya under your capitalization na, di ba?
Well, can we...
And then tumaas na yun talaga. Okay. So, Mr. President, may I clarify, no? So, yung land nila ngayon is titled under BCDA, is part nga ng kanilang capitalization. Pero ang laki na rin ng tinaas ng presyo nung kanilang mga lupa. So, pwede na rin silang, on paper, in the law, itaas na rin yung actual capitalization ng kumpanya as a juridical entity.
Well, Mr. President, at any rate, I'm not an expert in corporate law, but I just request for a revisiting of this section.
Sige po. Mr. President,
Because,
if it would please the minority leader, we'll submit a position paper to you over the weekend. Total, next week pa naman natin titignan yung... and over the weekend, I'll be looking at possible committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ito na lang po siguro, kasi we're back to the early extension of the corporate term of the conversion authority. I have been informed that in the TWG hearing dated October 12, 2023, DOF said that, I will just paraphrase, I will just quote the last sentence. We strongly recommend putting off discussion on this subject matter to a later period, referring to the prematurity of the legislation to extend the corporate life of the...
Yes.
So,
As I said, Mr. President, it's not a life or death issue for BCDA. And di ba po, sa LEDAC, for example, di ba, yung PISAM, magkatabi tayo ng upuan. We don't want to extend because it's for the benefit of the government for them to finish their work. Pero ang BCDA, it's to the benefit of the government for them to not only continue because they're doing well, other companies, GOCCs that handle properties in in the Philippines, as we saw, the old Napocor and the NHA, billion ang naging utang that drained. Ito naman, tuloy-tuloy ang dividendo ng BCDA. So I fully understand why DOF would be more conservative, but they cannot also dispute the fact that if they were an investor coming in, they would rather that mas mahaba yung corporate life. So if you'd permit, Mr. Minority Leader, Mr. President, I'll just submit a 1-2 page anong benefits ng extension at this time, and then I'll be open at the period of amendment if you feel differently,
Thank you.
Mr. Minority Leader.
well, BCDA is one of the GOCCs being monitored and evaluated by the GCG. Tama
Yes,
po yan?
Mr. President.
Sige, may we know the score?
Yeah.
Ano bang scorecard ni BCDA sa GCG system, Mr. President?
Pwede ba yun?
yung
Sorry, I needed a second because according to the president of BCDA, 100.5, sabi ko, over 100. So sabi ko, paano nangyari yon? Kasi nakakuha daw sila ng bonus point. But if you look historically, from 2016 to 2022, once lang sila bumaba ng 92%, 2018, 90%. But since 2016, never sila bumaba ng 92%. And then, eto nga, yung latest nila was 100.5%.
And then since BCDA na rin yung topic natin, baka pwede na rin pagmayabang ng BCDA, magkano na yung remittance nila sa national government, Mr. President? Maybe to the... either to the General Purpose Fund or to the AFP Modernization Fund, Mr. President?
Yes. Mr. President, with your permission, at the period of amendments, I'll put in everything for the record. But for today, a quick disposition of proceeds, 72 billion, dividends, 10 billion, guarantee fees, 4 billion, other remittances, 2 billion, so total 88.
1 year.
Since 1993 po to.
Since 88 billion?
88 billion. Opo.
Oh, maliit pala, Mr.
So the
President.
last 3 years, 5.8 billion ang remittance.
Okay, so these
Mr.
are
President,
modest amounts, Mr.
Yes.
President.
Well, modest, Mr. President, but compared to other GOCCs na utang-utang pa.
Top notch siya.
Oo. Tapos, the other thing, Mr. President, is marami kasing intangible. For example, the benefit of having an airport in Central Luzon. And as we all know naman, it takes time for the airport to make money. And then, for example po, they hosted the SEA Games. Many people don't know yung dami ng baseball fields, dami ng soccer fields, dami ng golf, and then the employment in the area. So it's been a driver for Central Luzon. No?
Sige. So, Mr. President, actually, my main concern was this request for an extension of the corporate life or the corporate term is being made too early with still 19 years to go. But as explained by our sponsor, he can justify it, Mr. President. So that would be all, Mr. President. So we thank the sponsor for his patience with us, and then siguro if we can just restyle some of the paragraphs there, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, we'll take a deeper look at the next few days, and may I commit to you, I'll also communicate with the DOF, telling them the benefits and asking if theirs was just an opinion or very hard stand. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to our Majority Leader, Senator JV, to our Senate President Pro Temp, Senator Estrada, and to our Minority Leader.
Thank you, Senator Cayetano. Thank you, Minority Leader. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2647.
Any objection? There being none, motions approved.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2878 under Committee Report number 346. This is the bill on the Economy, Planning, and Development Act. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, motions approved.
I move to resume the period of interpellation and recognize the sponsor, Senator Juan Miguel Mig-Zubiri, and to continue with this interpellation, Senator 𝗕𝗥𝗗𝗔𝗓𝗔𝗓𝗔𝗓𝗓. So moved, Mr. President.
Hearing no objection, the resumption of the period of interpellation is now in order. Senators Zubiri and the Minority Leader are hereby recognized. You want a minute suspension?
Minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspension.
Mr. President, I withdraw my previous motion. Instead, we proceed to the additional reference of business. So moved, Mr. President.
Secretary, please read the additional reference.
Additional reference of business committee report. Committee report 424 submitted by the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs on Senate number 2895 with Senator Dela Rosa as author. An act amending Republic Act number 10591 as amended, otherwise known as the Comprehensive Firearms and Ammunition Regulation Act. Recommending its approval in substitution of Senate numbers 2773, sponsor Senator Dela Rosa.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Mr. President, I move that we transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders committee report number 424 on Senate Bill number 2895. This is the bill amending RA number 1059 or the Comprehensive Firearms and Ammunition Regulation Act. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, motions approved.
I move that we consider Senate Bill number 2895 under committee report number 424.
Any objection? There being none, the motion is approved. Consideration of Senate Bill number 2895 is now in order. The Secretary will read only the title of the bill without prejudice, inserting into the record the whole text thereof.
An act amending Republic Act number 10591 as amended, otherwise known as the Comprehensive Firearms and Ammunition Regulation Act.
Mr. President, I move to recognize Senator Ronald Bato Dela Rosa as chairperson of the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs to deliver the sponsorship speech.
Senator Bato Dela Rosa is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, Majority Leader. Mr. President, my dear colleagues, I rise today to sponsor Senate Bill number 2773 under Committee Report number 424, which seeks to further refine and strengthen Republic Act number 10591, an 11-year-old law which regulates firearms ownership in the country. Hindi tulad sa Amerika, kung saan isang karapatan ang pag-iingat at paghawak ng armas ayon sa kanilang konstitusyon. Naging mahigpit po ang ating mga batas patungkol dito. Naniniwala sila na ang right to bear arms ay isang basic rights na bahagi sa pagtatanggol sa sarili o self-defense. Malayo ito kung ikukumpara sa atin na maituturing na isang privilege ang gun ownership. Sa kabila ng pagkakaiba ng ating mga bansa patungkol sa mga prinsipyo at polisiya sa pagpapahintulot na mag-ari ng mga baril, hindi maitatanggi na nagkakapareho tayo sa pagkilala na may karapatan ang bawat isang nilalang na protektahan ang kanyang sarili mula sa anumang banta ng panganib. In 2013, our legislators made history when they successfully passed RA 10591. Our country has benefited from this law since then, especially in ensuring that only those who are qualified are allowed to own, possess, and carry firearms. Kagaya po ng ibang mga batas, nakita po natin ang pangangailangan na i-update ang RA number 10591. Hindi lamang para makasabay sa pagbabago ng panahon, kundi para mas maging equitable at inclusive. Bagamat isang privilege ang pagmamayari ng baril sa ating bansa, iniiwasan din naman natin na maging exclusive ito, lalo na sa mga makapangyarihang lamang. We do not oblige everyone to pick up a firearm as their weapon of choice in protecting themselves. However, we must not also be too prohibitive to those who do. We allow the privilege of ownership of firearms, but we do not promote its unwarranted use. That is why we regulate. Bilang dating Chief PNP, batid ko ang dami at bigat ng trabahong nakaatas bilang pinuno ng ating kapulisan. Nariyan pa ang dami ng mga papilis na dapat pirmahan sa araw-araw. Things that probably our then lawmakers were not able to foresee 11 years ago. Mr. President, your Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs proposes amendments that will address all current issues and concerns in the implementation of RA 10591. This will further advocate responsible gun ownership and ensure the government's right to regulate the same. First, in line with the direction of providing efficient government service, we want to reduce the red tape in the issuance of licenses and permits. The proposed measure, Mr. President, authorizes the Chief PNP to designate a representative to issue permit to carry firearms outside residence or PTC-4. Meantime, the authority to issue and renew licenses to manufacture and to deal are likewise given to the Chief PNP or his duly authorized representative. Second, one of the disqualifications for obtaining a license to own and possess a firearm is that the applicant must not be an accused in a pending criminal case before any court of law. The only condition for this disqualification is that this pending criminal case must be for a crime that is punishable with a penalty of more than 2 years. Mr. President, no less than the Constitution provides that in all criminal proceedings, an accused shall be presumed innocent until the contrary is proved, thus disqualifying all individuals who have been accused of a criminal case automatically deprives them of the right to be presumed innocent. Pursuant to this constitutionally guaranteed right, the committee limited the disqualification. Only those applicants with a pending case involving the use of firearms, ammunitions, and major parts thereof, or when they are otherwise ordered disqualified by a court of competent jurisdiction. Third, we have added individuals or professionals who are exempted from the requirements of a threat assessment certificate. We acknowledge the threats which, as they say, comes along with the nature of their job, who are similarly situated with those already exempted from the requirements. As such, we are proposing to include allied medical professionals and chief security officers of financial and commercial institutions. In addition to those professionals, the committee also included reservists whose mission is to provide the base of expansion of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. This amendment is to the initiative of our colleague and a reservist himself, Senator 𝗕𝗥𝗚𝗓𝗏. With this, we can ensure that our citizen soldiers are ready to respond at any given time to the ongoing threat to our country's territorial waters and sovereignty. Fourth, the validity of licenses to manufacture and deal is fixed to a period of 10 years. This is in support of the newly passed law, Republic Act number 12024, otherwise known as the Self-Reliant Defense Posture Act. Wala pong higit na maaasahan natin sa pagtanggol ng ating bansa mula sa mga dayuhan, kundi ang ating mga sarili. Fifth, in recognition of the pride that our sports shooters have brought to the country in several competitions here and abroad, your committee deems it necessary that they be exempted from COMELEC authority to transport during the election period. This exemption will only be limited whenever they will be competing abroad during the election gun ban. It will be subject, of course, to safeguards such as being accompanied by a police escort to or from the port or airport of arrival or departure. Finally, in accordance with the objective of R 18591 of the proliferation of illegal firearms or weapons, we have extended the firearms amnesty to 3 years. It is our fervent hope that through this extension, individuals who have yet to register their firearms or renew their license will take advantage of this leeway without fear of being penalized. Mr. President, these amendments are not about loosening restrictions or promoting the proliferation of firearms. Ito po ay para lalong isulong ang kultura ng kaligtasan at pananagutan sa pamamagitan ng paglilinaw ng mga regulasyon at pagpapalaganap ng responsableng pagmamay-ari ng baril. Isa po itong hakbang tungo sa isang mas ligtas na bansa kung saan ang mga firearms ay binibigyan ng respeto at ginagamit ayon sa batas at responsableng mga layunin. As Robert Heinlein once said, there are no dangerous weapons, only dangerous men. May we all work together to create firearms regulations that are comprehensive and effective for a better and safer Philippines. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dela Rosa, Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President, next to co-sponsor the measure is Senator 𝗕𝗥𝗚𝗓𝗏. I move that he be recognized.
Senator 𝗕𝗏𝗏 is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I stand here today on behalf of all responsible gun owners and co-sponsor the amendments to the Comprehensive Firearms and Ammunition Regulations Act. 2 years ago, we pushed for the passage of Republic Act number 11766, amending the Comprehensive Firearms and Ammunition Regulation Act to extend the validity of firearm licenses from 2 years to every 5 or 10 years. We did this to encourage higher registration and renewal rates and reduce the number of unlicensed firearms in the country. And by the way, Mr. President, it has been very, very successful since then. Now, continuing along the same line, we have an expanded set of amendments that will give our licensed gun owners
particularly licensed sport shooters, some leeway to carry more of the registered firearms and possess more rounds of ammunition per firearm at any given time. We have also extended the firearms amnesty from 6 months to 3 years to allow owners more time to renew their firearms registration without getting penalized with delinquency fees. Make no mistake, Mr. President, these loosened restrictions are not to give our gun owners a free pass to buy and carry as many firearms as they want. Not at all. What we are doing, in fact, is finding ways to make it easier for gun owners to get their registrations and licenses in order. And ultimately, we are pushing for these amendments to help us take a better account of all the firearms in the country. Crucially, we are also streamlining the process of authorizing manufacturers and dealers, which includes allowing the Chief of the Philippine National Police to be represented by a designated approving authority when necessary. And instead of requiring that manufacturers lodge their applications with the Department of the Interior and Local Government, or the DILG, while dealers go, the PNP actually are now putting both manufacturers and dealers under the ambit of the PNP rather. Less bureaucracy and less confusion. We are also centralizing the registration of locally manufactured and imported firearms, which now all have to be done at the PNP Firearms and Explosives Office storage facility, instead of the old way, which mandated that locally manufactured firearms be inspected and registered at the manufacturing facility, while imported ones shall be inspected and registered at the FEO storage facility. As you can see, Mr. President, these are comprehensive amendments that serve to make licensing and registration smoother for all parties, from approving authorities to the manufacturing and the dealers as well of the firearms to the gun owners. We do not want to impose bureaucratic roadblocks that will discourage them from getting their licenses and registration in order. In this way, Mr. President, we keep our gun owners more responsible and mindful of their obligations under our firearms laws. With these amendments, we hope to keep a better track of all the firearm-related activities in the country and prevent unwanted incidences of crimes that involve the use of unlicensed firearms. As such, I hope that we can get the support of our colleagues in ensuring that the passage of this measure. Maraming salamat po, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Zubiri. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2895.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended. Resumed.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill numbers 2252, 1691, 1725, 355, 2614, 2615, 2616, 2617, 2618, and 2619. These are the bills declaring a protected landscape under the National Integrated Protected Area System, or NIPAS. So moved, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, the resumption of consideration of the aforementioned bills are now in order.
Mr. President, I move to resume the omnibus interpretation, all the measures, and recognize the sponsor, Senator Cynthia Villar.
Senator Cynthia Villar is hereby recognized.
Wala nang interpretation.
Wala. Yung isa lang.
Mr. Pre-
Yes,
Yes.
Senator Zubiri.
I just want to manifest my full support. I will not interpolate, of course, because we are on the same page. We are pro-environment, so I just like to manifest my full support of these measures. And if the proper time, it can be made co-author, co-sponsors. Thank you, Mr. President. With the permission, of course, of the sponsor.
Yeah, thank you very much for your support, Senator Zubiri, and we appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Majority Leader.
There being no other member who wishes to interpret, I move to close the period of interpretation. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of the aforementioned House bills.
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved.
I mean suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2878 under Committee Report number 346. This is the Bill on the Economy, Planning, and Development Act. So move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, the resumption of consideration of Senate Bill number 2878 under Committee Report number 346 is now in order.
I move to resume the period of interpellation and recognize the sponsor, Senator 𝗕𝗏𝗛𝗏𝗓𝗏 and to continue with this interpellation, Senator 𝗥𝗜𝗏𝗏𝗡𝗚 III.
Hearing no objection, resumption of the period of interpellation is now in order. Senators Zubiri and Pimentel are hereby recognized.
Thank you very much,
Please
Mr.
proceed.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. This is just a continuation of our earlier interpellation. And I think, if I recall, I think we had an extensive interpellation the last time, Mr. President. So, and then I've been informed by my staff that this bill was previously filed during the 17th and 18th Congresses.
That's right.
So there have been attempts to really legislate into law the Department of Economic Development.
Yes.
Yun po. So, ano po ba nangyari doon sa 17th and 18th? Bakit hindi tayo nagtagumpay? Ano ba, maalala ba natin yung issues na raised noon?
What had happened, Your Honor, Mr. President, the Secretary Pernia was on board at that time, and apparently, when this bill was being discussed on the floor or on this in the Senate, nagkapalitan po. They changed Secretary Pernia to Secretary 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, and then he wanted to study the bill further. So parang pinahold ng Secretary Carl.
Sige po. The main concern I think I raised last time was that whether going through the mode of creating a department for economic development would be constitutional in the sense that it would be the independent economic planning agency mentioned in our constitution. So I think we discussed this, and I'm sure during the break, during the interregnum, NEDA also studied the issue. So for as long as this representation can be assured by our sponsor and the team, the legal team backing him, that this bill is compliant with the Constitution and that it can be done through this method, then we just need to do some minor changes, and we can do it during the amendment stage, Mr. President. So with that, Mr. President, I'm willing to terminate my interpellation and congratulate and thank the good sponsor as well as his team, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'd like to thank our distinguished Minority Floor Leader for his magnanimity. I assure him that there would be no changes in the setup, only by titles and of course the functions that are already mandated to them by the different laws that were passed that included NEDA in the discussions. So maraming salamat po sa ating Minority Floor Leader. And of course, we will await all the amendments that they would like to, including, I believe, Senator 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 also has some amendments, possible amendments that we're going to take up. So thank you very much for that, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senators Zubiri and Pimentel. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, there being no other reservation for interpellation, I move to close the period of interpellation.
Is there an objection? There being none, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of amendments and recognize the sponsor, Senator 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 for the individual amendments.
Senator Zubiri is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We have certain individual amendments to propose. And of course, if we'd like a clean copy after, we could make a clean copy after and further wait for amendments by our other colleagues. So, Mr. President, if I may I start?
Yes, please proceed.
On page 7, section 11, line 11, delete the word plan after the word staffing and replace it with pattern. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, the amendment is approved.
On page 7, section 12, line 14, after the word except, insert the phrase in Metro Manila end. I so move, Mr. President.
An objection? There being none, amendments approved.
On page 8, section 13, line 27, delete the word "and." I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 29, delete the punctuation marks and replace with "and." I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Subject to stamp, Mr. President. On the same section, delete item D, starting from line 30 of page 8 until line 2 of page 9. Insert instead a new item 3 to read as follows. Number 3, Public-Private Partnership Center of the Philippines, or PPPC, created pursuant to Executive Order Number 8, Series of 2010, as amended by Republic Act Number 11966, otherwise known as the Public-Private Partnership Code of the Philippines. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
On page 12, section 23, line 4, delete the letter V under DEPD. I so move. After DEPD. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
On the same page, line 6, after C, Executive Secretary, insert another item D, Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, and renumber the succeeding items accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Mr. President, on page 15, section 28, line 17, delete the phrase Department of Agriculture and open parenthesis and close parenthesis after the word DA. I so move. And this will retain only the acronym DA. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
On page 20, section 34, delete item D on lines 11 to 12 and renumber the succeeding items accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
On page 24, section 42, line 23, between "and" and EO, number 28, insert the phrase section 1 and 2 off. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, the motion's approved. The amendment's approved.
And lastly, may I propose an omnibus amendment to change the acronym? Kasi right now, Mr. President, it is DEPD. It's quite confusing to DepEd. So, of course, we're still open to amendments, but the proposal, Your Honor, is DepPad, which is Department of Economic Planning and Development, from DEPD to DepPad. Omnibus amendment, Mr. President. I so move.
Okay, any objection? The omnibus amendment is hereby approved.
Thank you. Although if there are members and colleagues who still want to change the name, if you find a better acronym, Your Honor, maybe the minority can help me come up with a better acronym. We will be open to that. So what we can do, Mr. President, we can just wait for a clean copy, submit it to our minority leader and Ma'am Risa, and then they can study, and we'll wait for further amendments for tomorrow, Mr. President. So thank you very much, Majority Leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Zubiri, Majority Leader.
Mr. President, with no other individual, I move to close.
We still have tomorrow. We can send Risa meron pa.
Okay. Yes, Mr. President, I withdraw my motion. I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2878.
Any objection? There being none, the motion's approved.
Thank you, Joa. Thank you. Thank you, Minority Leader. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Salamat.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed to reference of business.
Secretary, please read the reference of business.
Second edition of reference of business, committee reports. Committee report 425, jointly by the Committees on Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality and Finance, of Senate number 2896, with Senator 𝗙𝗢𝗢𝗧 as author. An act providing for the Magna Carta of Children, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate number 2612, sponsor Senator 𝗙𝗢𝗢𝗧.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Committee report 426, jointly by the Committees on Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality and Justice and Human Rights, of Senate number 2897, with Senators 𝗙𝗢𝗙𝗢𝗪, Padilla, and 𝗙𝗢𝗢𝗪𝗡 as authors. An act amending Republic Act number 11313, otherwise known as the Safe Spaces Act, and for other purposes. Recommending its approval in substitution of Senate numbers 2232 and 2810, sponsor Senator 𝗙𝗢𝗢𝗪𝗏.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
427, by the Committee on Public Services and House number 10926, an act renewing for another 25 years the franchise granted to the Manila Electric Company under Republic Act number 9209, An act granting the Manila Electric Company a franchise to construct, operate, and maintain a distribution system for the conveyance of electric power to the end users in the cities, municipalities of Metro Manila, Bulacan, Cavite, and Rizal, and certain cities, municipalities, barangays in Batangas, Laguna, Quezon, and Pampanga. Recommending this approval with amendments taking into consideration Senate numbers 2824 and 2876, sponsor Senator Villanueva.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
428 by the Committee on Justice and Human Rights on Senate number 2898 with Senators 𝗥𝗓𝗄𝗧 and 𝗕𝗓𝗄𝗧 as authors, an act liberalizing the lease of private lands by foreign investors, establishing the stability of long-term lease contracts, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 7652, otherwise known as the 17, sponsor Senator 𝗕𝗓𝗄𝗓.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
429, jointly by the Committees on Science and Technology, Civil Service, Government Reorganization, and Professional Regulation, Energy, Ways and Means, and Finance of Senate number 2899 with Senators Tolentino, Revilla Jr., Escudero, Gatchalian, and Cayetano AP as authors. An act providing for a comprehensive legal framework for nuclear safety, security, and safeguards in the peaceful utilization of nuclear energy in the Philippines, and establishing the Philippine Atomic Energy Regulatory Authority and appropriating funds therefore. Recommending this approval in substitution of Senate number 1194, 1491, 2498, and 2506, taking into consideration House number 9293. Sponsor Senator Cayetano AP.
To the calendar for ordinary business. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for Special Orders Committee Report number 428 on Senate Bill number 2898. This is the bill amending the Investors Lease Act. So moved, Mr. President.
There any objection? There being none, the motion is approved.
I move that we consider Senate Bill number 2898 under Committee Report number 428.
There any objection? There being none, the motion is approved. The consideration of Senate Bill number 2898 is now in order. The Secretary will read only the title of the bill without prejudice to inserting into the record the whole text thereof.
An act liberalizing the lease of private lands by foreign investors, establishing the stability of long-term private lands by foreign investors, establishing the stability of long-term lease contracts, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 7652, otherwise known as the Investors Lease Act.
Mr. President, I move to recognize Senator 𝗥𝗓𝗄𝗓, our Minority Leader, the Chairperson of the Committee on Justice and Human Rights, to deliver his sponsorship speech.
The Minority Leader is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, today I rise to sponsor Senate Bill number 2898 under Committee Report number 428, entitled an act liberalizing the lease of private lands by foreign investors, establishing the stability of long-term lease contracts, amending this act. The Philippines remains steadfast in its commitment to improving its overall investment climate and sustaining economic growth. Over the years, the country has taken landmark reforms to remove barriers to foreign investment and stimulate economic activity. RA 11647, which amended the Foreign Investments Act, eliminated restrictions on foreign ownership of many enterprises, except those subject to nationality requirements enshrined in the Constitution and those outlined in the Foreign Investment Negative List. RA 11659, which amended the Public Services Act, liberalized public utilities, thereby opening sectors such as railways, airports, expressways, and telecommunications to 100% foreign ownership. RA 11595, which amended the Retail Trade Liberalization Act, lowered the paid-up capital requirement for foreign retail enterprises. And more recently, we passed RA 12066, also known as Create More, amending RA 11534 or the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises Act, which reduced corporate income tax rates and rationalized incentives for locators within special economic zones. Despite these strides, several challenges remain. Poor infrastructure, high logistics cost, regulatory inconsistencies, and a cumbersome bureaucracy continue to hamper the government's efforts to attract foreign investments. Moreover, foreign investors often face risks and uncertainties tied to lease agreements, which this bill seeks to address. Under RA 7652, foreign investors may lease private lands for an initial period of 50 years, renewable once for another 25 years, or a total of 75 years. While this may be progressive for its time, the evolving global investment landscape necessitates further liberalization to keep the Philippines competitive. To address these uncertainties and in line with the government's efforts to liberalize measures relative to foreign investments, this proposed measure seeks to extend the allowable aggregate lease term for foreign investors to 99 years. By providing longer lease periods, the measure offers greater stability and predictability for foreign investors. This stability, in turn, fosters investor confidence, enabling them to commit to long-term projects and secure returns on their investments. Notably, other ASEAN countries such as Singapore, Malaysia, and Brunei have adopted similar 99-year maximum period of lease for foreign investors, further underscoring the need for this reform to maintain our regional competitiveness. Aside from extending the aggregate lease term to 99 years, the bill includes the following salient features and provisions. Number one, investment requirement. Foreign investors must have an approved and registered investment under the Foreign Investments Act, or the CREATE, as amended by CREATE More, or has complied with the investment requirements prescribed by the appropriate Investment Promotions Agency, IPA. Green enterprises such as those in agriculture, agroforestry, and ecological conservation are also included in the list of allowed investments. Number two, registration of lease contracts. Lease contracts entered into by foreign lessees must be registered with the Registry of Deeds and annotated on the certificate of title covering the leased property. This ensures that the lease contracts are binding on and respected by third parties and protects the investor's leasehold rights. Number three, sublease. Unless there is a stipulation to the contrary, the leased area may be sublet but subject to registration and the same conditions and limitations as the primary lease. Number four, three-year rule. Failure to commence the investment project within 3 years from the signing of the lease contract shall warrant its termination. Number five, penalties. The fines for violating the act have been increased to a minimum of 1 million pesos and a maximum of 10 million pesos. Beyond the economic incentives for investors under existing laws, this bill is expected to boost national and local economies by generating employment, developing local industries, and enhancing human capital. Moreover, it will encourage established foreign companies with a long-standing presence in the Philippines to sustain or even expand their contributions to our country's socio-economic development. The Department of Trade and Industry has noted that leases for several foreign companies are set to expire within the next 20 years, highlighting the need to keep investments from leaving the country or at least giving them more reasons to stay. Ladies and gentlemen, the conditions are ripe for the passage of this measure. In 2023, the Philippines' gross domestic product grew by 5.6%, the fastest in Southeast Asia. Our special economic zones continue to thrive, attracting productive collaborations from both public and private sectors. The Philippines is recognized for its well-educated and skilled workforce, with most firms expressing confidence in the competencies of our talent pool. It is time to capitalize on these strengths, maximize our nation's potential, and strike while the iron is hot. Batid natin na maaring may ilang pangamba ang ating mga kababayan na para bang ipinauubayan na natin ang mga lupain ng ating bansa sa mga dayuhan. Let me assure this august chamber that this proposed amendment fully respects the provisions of the 1987 Constitution, which safeguards Filipino ownership of lands while allowing limited economic use by foreigners through regulated lease arrangements. Agricultural lands covered by the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program shall remain to be covered by such law. The reforms proposed under this bill remain consistent with the constitutional mandate to uphold national sovereignty, territorial integrity, national interest, and the right to self-determination, even as we welcome mutually beneficial partnerships with foreign investors. While liberalizing lease terms, the state retains its authority to regulate foreign investments to ensure they align with our national goals and priorities. And the state shall protect Filipino enterprises against unfair foreign competition and trade practices. So, Mr. President, dear colleagues, I urge your support for this measure, which seeks a well-calibrated approach in striking a balance between fostering an investment-friendly environment and safeguarding the principles enshrined in our Constitution. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Minority Leader. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 428.
Is there any objection? There being none, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, Senator Ronald would like to insert into the records her co-sponsorship speech on Senate Bill number 2878.
The co-sponsorship speech of Senator Legarda is hereby inserted into the records.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2865 under Committee Report number 343.
Is there an objection? There being none, resumption of consideration of Senate Bill number 2865 is now in order.
Mr. President, Parliament, the status of the measure is that we are now in the period of interpellation. I move to recognize the sponsor of the measure, Senator 𝗕𝗥𝗚𝗙𝗢𝗛.
The distinguished gentleman from Valenzuela is hereby recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader. Mr. President, this representation made a further review of Senate Bill number 2865 under Committee Report 343, which took into consideration House Bill number 9277, or the Capital Markets Efficiency Promotions Act. Further discussions were also made with stakeholders, particularly the Department of Finance, who have submitted their updated position papers on the matter. Therefore, before we start the interpellation on this measure, this representation wishes to manifest before this chamber that as chairperson of the Committee on Ways and Means, this representation will be introducing an amendment by way of substitution during the period of amendments. This shall be made without prejudice to my fellow senators asking questions during the period of amendments. I have also sent an advance notice on November 29, 2024 to the senators on my intent to file an amendment by substitution of the committee report number 343. To give the body a brief overview, the substitute bill will include amendments on passive income taxes and excise taxes on automobiles and repeal of tax exemption and preferential tax rates of government-owned and controlled corporations. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator 𝗕𝗥𝗚𝗙𝗢𝗛. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, pursuant to the manifestation of the Chairman of the Committee on Ways and Means, I move that we close the period of interpellations on Committee Report number 340 on Senate Bill number 2865. Again, this is without prejudice to the members asking questions during the period of amendments.
Is there an objection? There being none, the motion.
Mr. President,
before that, the Minority Leader is recognized.
Looks like I have totally forgotten what has happened to this bill, Mr. President. So, where are we now? So, have we interpellated on the original bill?
Not yet, Mr. President.
So not yet. So I think it's best not to close the period for interpellation.
Well, Mr. President, we will be amending by substitution. So
And
meaning
then-
we will replace the entire bill, not entire bill, but we will replace some of
Then
the
we will
concepts.
come back to the interpellation stage.
Correct, Mr. President. So we will just
Without
substitute
prejudice
it.
to asking questions, Minority Leader.
I just got lost because the sponsor mentioned that without prejudice to asking questions during the period of amendments. So that was what got us worried, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President,
So
so
we will go back to the period for interpellation. Is that correct?
amendments, Mr. President, because the entire bill will be substituted, Mr. President, with additional concepts. That's the right description, Mr. President. So before we start the period of interpellation, we substituted the bill so that the interpellation will be based on the new substitute bill, Mr. President.
Tama.
Yes, precisely, Mr. President. Sana it's really, we have to go back to the period for interpellations. That's
Maybe,
the point.
Suspend.
Yes, we can suspend for a minute.
Session suspended. Assume.
Mr. President, I reiterate my motion that we close the period of interpellations on Committee Report number 343 on Senate Bill number 2865. Again, this without prejudice to the members asking questions during the period of amendments. So move, Mr. President.
There any objection? There being none, the motion is hereby approved.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2865.
Any objection? There being none, the motion is approved.
I mean the suspension, Mr. President.
Assume.
Mr. President, I move that we transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders, Committee Report number 425 on Senate Bill number 2896. This is the bill on the Magna Carta of Children. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
I move that we consider Senate Bill number 2896 under Committee Report number 425.
Is there an objection? There being none, the motion is approved. Consideration of Senate Bill number 2896 now in order. The Secretary is directed to read the title of the bill without prejudice to inserting into the record the whole text thereof.
An act providing for the Magna Carta of Children.
To sponsor the measure, I move to recognize our Deputy Minority Leader, Senator 𝗕𝗓𝗓, Chairperson of the Committee on Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality, to deliver her sponsorship speech.
The Deputy Minority Leader, Senator 𝗕𝗓𝗓, is hereby recognized.
Salamat po, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is my honor and privilege to sponsor Committee Report number 425, or the Magna Carta of Children, a long-standing advocacy of child rights advocates in the Philippines. The Magna Carta of Children has the following important features. First, it codifies the rights of children as reposed in other laws and clarifies the primary duty bearers in the exercise of these rights. At present, this is dispersed in various legislation like the Family Code, the Civil Code, the CWC, the DSWD. Two, it contains protective provisions for children in particularly vulnerable situations, such as children who are victims of climate-related disasters, children in GIDA areas, victims of human trafficking and violent crime, etc. At present, only children in situations of armed conflict and children in conflict with the law are given carved-out special protections. Third, it institutionalizes the creation of child advocacy centers to legislate the protections given to child witnesses and child survivors of crime. Para po itong one-stop shop ng services para sa kanila. At para hindi na paulit-ulit ang kanilang paglahad ng kanilang naranasan at nasaksihan. This is a particularly important and evidence-based innovation, Mr. President, that is already existing in some local government units that needs to be replicated on a national scale. There are many international donors willing to fund the construction of these centers because they have been proven to work in Thailand, Cambodia, and the United States. Kailangan natin dito. Fourth, it closes an important gap in the 𝗓𝗦𝒃 law in cases of online child sexual abuse with an extraterritorial element. Fifth, it mandates the creation of the Child Ombudsman under the auspices of the CHR. And sixth and last, it creates the Philippine Commission on Children from the Child Welfare Council. May PCW for women, may NYC for youth. Bakit wala para sa ating mga kabataan? We also confirm, Mr. President, that DBM and CSC are in full support of the creation of the Philippine Commission on Children from what is currently the CWC. Mr. President, this bill deserves our utmost support. It is a happy bill, a bill our 19th Congress should rally around. Let us make this our legacy to our nation's children, and perhaps, as Christmas is coming, our Christmas gift to them as well. Salamat po, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Risa, Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration Senate Bill number 2896.
Any objection? There being none, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to calendar for special orders committee report number 426 on Senate Bill number 2897. This is the bill amending the Safe Spaces Act. So move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved.
I move that we consider Senate Bill number 2897 under committee report number 426.
Is there an objection? There being none, the motion is approved. Consideration of Senate Bill number 2897 is now in order. The Secretary is directed to read the title of the bill without prejudice to inserting into the record the whole text thereof.
Anak amending Republic Act number 11313, otherwise known as the Safe Spaces Act, and for other purposes.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, I move to recognize our Deputy Minority Leader, once again, Senator 𝗕𝗢𝗙𝗪𝗡, Chairperson of the Committee on Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality, to deliver her sponsorship speech.
Senator Risa 𝗕𝗢𝗙𝗪𝗡 once again is recognized.
Salamat po muli, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is my honor and privilege to sponsor amendments to the Safe Spaces Act or Committee Report number 426. Nagpapasalamat po ako sa authors na sina Senator Robin Padilla at Senator Cynthia Villar, the authors of the two bills that were consolidated into the committee report. This bill responds to the urgent calls by our constituents, particularly young women in schools, to reform the law in order to better address their lived realities. Nung ginawa natin ang kasalukuyang batas, no one knew what AI was. Ngayon po, talamak na ang deepfakes, and pornography is being created with the use of these emerging technologies. Sa pamamagitan ng bill na ito, victims will have the remedy of asking for the takedown of their digital images that violate this act. This remedy has been put to good use in our OSAIC and CSAM law. We know it works. Why not make it work for violations of safe spaces too? We also need to respond to the multiple cases of teacher predators. Magre-resign lang, tapos lilipat sa bagong school, kung saan ay magmamanyak siya ulit. This bill seeks to respond to this by ensuring that adults working in close proximity to children have no history of predatory behavior. Lastly, it increases the penalties for gender-based harassment taking place in schools and workplaces. Napakaliit nga naman ng 5,000 pesos na parusa para sa paaralan at workplaces for violations of this law. Halos hindi mararamdaman ng bulsa, samantalang ramdam ng biktima ang kabastusang ginawa sa kanya. Salamat muli kina Senator Cynthia at Senator Robin. This is the heart of their proposal. Salamat po, Mr. President, dear colleagues. I hope we can shepherd this bill to passage for our women and girls.
Thank you, Senator 𝗕𝗢𝗪𝗡, Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2897. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2837 under Committee Report number 331. This is the bill extending the term of the Power Sector Assets and Liabilities Management Corporation. So move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? Hearing none, the resumption of consideration of Senate Bill number 2837 under Committee Report 331 is now in order.
Having sponsored the measure, I move to open the period of interpellation, recognize the sponsor, Senator Mark Villar, and to interpellate our Minority Leader, Senator 𝗥𝗜𝗄𝗡.
Hearing no objection, the period of interpellation is in order. Who am I going to recognize?
Mr. President, instead it's Senator 𝗙𝗢𝗙𝗛𝗏 who will interpellate.
Who is going to sponsor, Senator Mark?
Yes, Senator Mark Villar will sponsor, and to interpellate is
right.
Senator 𝗙𝗢𝗙𝗏.
Senators Mark Villar and 𝗕𝗢𝗙𝗙𝗏 are hereby recognized.
Sorry, brother.
Ready, Mr. President? Suspend ba? Oh, Mr. President, will the good sponsor yield to a few questions?
Yes, Mr. President, we yield.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, let me start off with the original mandate of 𝗕𝗢𝗻. In simple terms, 𝗕𝗻's mandate was to sell the assets, and all the proceeds that it will collect will be used to pay off the debts. And this was in line of privatizing the entire electric power sector, I think 30 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. President. And in fact, when I went back to the transcript of the discussions on 𝗕𝗻, Senator John Osmeña said, 𝗕𝗻 was conceived as a special purpose vehicle simply to warehouse all of the obligations of the NPC and to handle the sale of the assets. And he went on saying, 𝗕𝗻 is a transitory vehicle. At the end of the day, when all the debts of NPC shall have been liquidated and all the proceeds of the sales have been received, then 𝗕𝗻 will disappear. So the intention of 𝗕𝗻, even this was in the transcript dated October 15, 2001, Mr. President. So it was clear during the deliberations that time that 𝗕𝗻's life is limited because it has a single task of selling the assets and paying off the debts, Mr. President. And that was the whole rationale why during that time the Senate created 𝗕𝗻, Mr. President. So Mr. President, let me ask the good sponsor, what is the rationale now of extending 𝗕𝗻? Because the original intent of 𝗕𝗻 is to have a limited life, Mr. President. So what is now the rationale why 𝗕𝗻 is being extended?
Yes, Mr. President, at this point, though the 𝗕𝗻 has made many strides, great strides towards liquidating or selling the assets, the former assets of the assets of NAPOCOR, there's still some liabilities that remain. So I think it's important that we, in order to dispose of these assets, at the same time make sure that these liabilities are not passed on directly to the national government. I think it's important that we give them some more time just to wrap up the just to wrap up their mandate.
To date, Mr. President, how much? Let me maybe backtrack a little bit. How much debt did 𝗕𝗻 absorb 30 years ago?
Yes.
And how much debt is remaining right now, Mr. President?
Yes, at the peak of its debt obligation, which was in 2003, the debt of 𝗕𝗻 was at 1.24 trillion pesos. And as it stands today, June of 2024, the debt stands at 277.2 billion pesos, which represents a decrease of 78% from its peak level.
Okay. And what, if I remember it correctly also, Mr. President, that the intention, if ever 𝗕𝗻 will not completely liquidate the debt or completely pay off the debt, it's national government who will absorb the debt. And it will form part of its debt stock, meaning national government will eventually liquidate it. So with that in mind, Mr. President, what can national government cannot do that PSAM can do? Because national government can obviously pay off the debt, even in the absence of PSAM. But what can PSAM do that the national government cannot do insofar as debt repayments or debt payments are concerned?
Well, I think with regards to the liquidation of the assets, of course, the PSAM has a greater familiarity. If we dissolve the organization, the national government would have a difficult time picking up where they left off. I think there might be some time lost during the transition. And it's also important to note that the PSAM also has existing operations. There are still some power generating assets that the PSAM manages. So, of course, in terms, there might be some transitional problems because there are operational concerns also that there are existing operations within the PSAM that might be affected should PSAM dissolve and all its assets reverted back to the national government.
But Mr. President, I understand in the past discussions with PSAM, on the debt side, it's not so much of a problem because government can absorb it, national government can absorb it and pay it off as how we do it with other loans. What the good sponsor is saying, what his honor is saying is the remaining assets that will be sold off. And also being operated right now.
That's one of the concerns. The current assets that are operational that do generate power and they might be affected by any transition to the national government because obviously I don't know what agency would be able to step in immediately and operate these assets. But at the same time, I think over the years somehow PSAM has developed expertise in the selling of its assets, and that kind of knowledge is something that might be effective should the PSAM dissolve. So we find it more efficient for us to extend it further. Now, whether or not how many years, we can, of course, we're open to any amendments regarding as to the length that we want to set. But I think in the interest of efficiency, it would be more prudent to extend the PSAM so that you can give them a little more time to finally wrap up. It's because as I mentioned earlier, it's already been reduced significantly up to 78%. So I feel that we just need to give it a little more time to wrap up its operation so that it can fulfill its original mandate rather than abruptly cutting it and perhaps affecting the existing operations of its assets. At the same time, maybe delaying the disposition of the final few assets of PSAM.
Thank you, Mr. President, for that answer. When you say wrap up, good sponsor, which part of PSAM's operation needs additional 25 years of wrapping up, Mr. President? Because again, no, debt can be paid. It's just a matter of programming. But which part of PSAM's operation needs additional 25 years of wrapping up, Mr. President?
Yes, I think at this point, there are certain generating assets that remain. Just to give you an idea, Mr. President, the generation assets consist of the approximately 1,000 megawatt 𝗥𝗚𝗙𝗢𝗔𝗓 and in the Mindanao region. And also there's 2 power plants under IPP contracts, namely the 796 megawatt 𝗙𝗢𝗢𝗪𝗏, Botocan, Kalayaan, and in the Luzon region, and the 200 megawatt Mindanao coal-fired thermal plant. So these are some of the assets that need to be also disposed of. At the same time, the PSAM also has numerous real estate assets that account for a total area of 12,298 hectares. So these are also disposable assets that will also need to be liquidated in the near future.
How much, Mr. President, before I go to the assets, how much is the value of the assets of PSAM? What is the remaining value of the assets of PSAM right now, Mr. President?
Well, of course, we can only give a range.
More or less, Mr. President, just an estimate on, value of the
Yes, the remaining assets, the value, it could range, and it's quite broad, but the range can be between 118 and 230 billion pesos. So those are just the assets. But of course, they have receivables also accounting for 110 billion. And they also have proceeds from their concessions amounting to 51 billion.
So all in all, Mr. President, if you count receivables as assets, which is considered current assets, what is the total both current and non-current assets, Mr.
Well,
President?
it ranges maybe around 279 to 390 billion, 391 billion.
So in other words, if the assets are completely sold, the receivables are completely collected, there's enough cash to pay off the 277 billion, Mr. President. That's
Yes,
in simple terms, Mr.
Yes.
President.
Yes, Mr. President.
And what we're saying is, from the list of assets that you mentioned, it's the generation assets that needs 25 years to privatize, Mr. President.
I'm sorry.
But I'm saying earlier that among the assets that you mentioned earlier, it's the generation assets that we need to, it's the privatization of the generation assets that needs 25 years in order to privatize.
Yes, we need more time now as to do we need the whole 25 years? That's something that we can, there might be some proposed amendments as to the period of time, which we've had discussions about. So there's some flexibility there. Definitely, so we're open to any amendments with regards to the time period. But we believe that we do need to give them additional time just to allow them to dispose of the assets at a price that is acceptable. You know, we also don't want to rush these things so that we can maximize the value that the government gets for these assets. So we also don't want to give, we also want to give sufficient time for them to negotiate, to find the best possible deal for government.
And also the receivables, Mr. President. What is the term or the duration of the receivables, Mr. President? How long are we going to collect from the payees, Mr. President? Ano yung isa? Ano yung 51?
Well, some of them are still with pending court cases. These are delinquent payments that they are still working out. So it may take some time. Again, it's another reason why they might need a little time just to wrap up these cases so that they can also liquidate these receivables.
Yeah. Mr. President, I understand that receivables are also from the privatization itself. So some of them are not outright cash, but in the form of receivables, Mr. President. How much are those?
Well, the breakdown of the receivables, delinquent clients is 55 billion, and from Meralco it's about 16 billion, and the rest from the cooperatives were the clients also, about 39 billion.
So, Mr. President, out of the 110, 55 billion are current and being collected right now.
But they're considered delinquent payers at this point. Delinquent is 55 billion.
But the remaining 95.
The total is 110. So the breakdown is 55 from delinquent clients,
And-
the 39 from power cooperatives, receivables from power cooperatives, and the other 16 are from Meralco.
Okay.
And
And how many are not delinquent, Mr. President? Meaning they're paying, and there's a time horizon for the complete payment of the receivables, Mr. President.
yes, I think obviously the ones that are marked as delinquent. The other ones are also they're pending some court cases, some decisions. So of course there's as to whether they're delinquent or not is debatable, but definitely these are receivables that they're striving to collect.
All right, Mr. President. What I'm trying to understand, Mr. President, is the 110 billion pesos receivable. if this will be transferred to national government. Because I'm trying to, my chain of thought, Mr. President, is
Eventually.
if PSAM will not be renewed, everything will be transferred to national government. And what can national government cannot do that PSAM can do, Mr. President? So I'm trying to understand if the accounts receivables, if we transfer that to national government, can national government collect it better?
Yes, because the current cases are with the PSAM. So if should there be a transition to the national government, that will involve a lot of administrative work. So, paperwork just to transfer.
So it's on ongoing litigation,
Yes,
Mr.
yes.
President.
So it would involve a lot of administrative processes that might delay the collection of these receivables.
Thank you, Mr. President. And the remaining asset, I would assume these are properties.
Yes, aside from the power plants, these are properties, real properties.
All right. Mr. President, I understand that the government, there's a department in, or there's an office in the DOF called the Asset Privatization Trust. Is that still effective under the DOF?
What is it called?
Or Asset Privatization Office? I think it changed to a different name.
Yeah, I think
Mr.
it's
President.
the Asset Privatization Council, I believe, and it's operative.
Is it
If that's the
the
same one, it's operative.
Asset Privatization
Council?
Council. So it became a council right now. Before it's APT, but I'm not very sure if it's
Yeah, parang private. I believe it's Mr. President. I believe it's Privatization Council.
it's
If that's-
privatization under the DOF.
Yes. Yes.
So logically, Mr. President, if ever PSAM's charter will not be approved, the entire list of assets of PSAM will be transferred to that entity. Is that correct, Mr. President?
So the entity will be transferred to? Yeah. Yes, that is the entity that it would logically be transferred to.
And Mr. President, does a good sponsor know what is the success rate or the number of assets being privatized by this privatization council? How many assets have they privatized in the last maybe 2 years, 3 years?
Yeah, Mr. President, I don't have the exact number as of this moment, but if we can submit it to Your Honor if we have, just give us a little time if we can.
Yes, Mr. President. Well, the chain of thought that I was thinking is, since this office is already there, it's created, and its sole mandate is to privatize, but are they effective in privatizing?
Yes.
Because I do appreciate from the good sponsor that these assets are very technical in nature. They're power plants, they're hydropower plants. So just mere transferring them to the privatization council doesn't mean that they can effectively privatize those assets.
Yeah, I think especially in the case of an actual operating asset, it might be different. Maybe perhaps land holdings would be easier for them to take control of. But when we're talking about operational assets that provide a very important service to the public, it might be difficult for them to operate it as, I don't think they're, operating power plants is definitely not within their realm of expertise.
Yeah. Just for the record, Mr. President, how many operating assets are still with PSAM? How many operating power plants are still?
Yes, we mentioned earlier the 3 power plants, the Agus Pulangi, the 𝗙𝗢𝗢𝗪, Botocan, 𝗙𝗢𝗢𝗪, and the Mindanao Coal-Fired Thermal.
And these are operating assets.
Yes, these are correct. These are operating assets.
So, Mr. President, we'll just request from the good sponsor, maybe the last 5 years, how many assets have the privatization council have privatized? Because my chain of thought here is to understand whether the privatization council can handle the privatization of these operating assets, because logically they will be absorbing this. I would assume they will absorb these assets and they will be tasked to privatize it. But then again, privatizing assets is not a simple task. I understand, and especially if the assets are operating, because you have management expertise, you have a learning curve to
Yes.
to climb, and it might not be the best decision to transfer it to the privatization council because they have to learn.
Yes.
No? Number one, they have to learn how these assets operate. They have to learn how to value the assets. They have to learn how this operating asset should be financed and funded. So instead of increasing the value of these assets, if these assets will not be supervised properly, it might deteriorate in the process, Mr. President. So that's where I'm coming from, Mr. President. So I just want to understand the number of assets the privatization council have privatized, Mr. President.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. And I agree that, it's, we have to be very vigilant about these assets and find the best way to maximize the value for our government. It's not, I'm sure the question is not so much whether or not they can, it's what is the most efficient way that we can dispose of these assets. And my contention, and I think this bill would, and of course this bill is designed so that it allows government enough time that they can maximize the value of these assets, which a majority of which have already been unloaded. But I think a little time would go a long way into maximizing value for the government, and at the same time, allowing us to continue operations of these very vital assets.
It's just, Mr. President, but the good sponsor already mentioned that there's still room to talk about the extension, Mr. President, because again, a hard stop is also a signal to management that they have to take their mandate seriously, Mr. President. If my view here, if there's an opportunity to extend the life, it might also signal to management that there's no sense of urgency, Mr.
Yes.
President. So that's why I am trying to understand the logic of the extension, because we want to stay true to the original mandate to privatize, to pay off the debts. And this is a signal to management to work faster and more efficient to reach that mandate, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, this representation is very open to, in the period of amendments, to suggestions that might, of a timeline that would be satisfactory to everyone. I think that that is something that we can definitely fine-tune so that we have a time period that challenges the PSAM to complete their mandate. And at the same time, it also, it's long enough but short enough that they have pressure to complete it at the soonest possible time.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I read through the transcript during the hearing, and I also noticed that PSAM is currently managing 38 existing long-term contracts, Mr. President. What are these long-term contracts that PSAM is currently managing?
Yeah, these are operation and maintenance contracts and also land lease agreements.
Operation and maintenance contracts of power plants, Mr. President?
Non-power components. So examples would be like 𝗙𝗢𝗢𝗔𝗓 Hydro. These are areas that are just, they're not the power generation aspect, but it's still, the asset is under control of the PSAM, but they're not part of the power generating assets.
And PSAM is currently managing these contracts. What is the role of PSAM in these 38 contracts, Mr. President? Are they playing an active role in these contracts?
Yes, they are the owners of these non-power generation components, and they're in charge of managing these contracts.
And in an event that PSAM's charter will not be extended, who will take over the 38 long-term contracts, Mr. President?
Those will be transferred to national government.
Which particular agency may we inquire?
Most likely the DOE.
The DOE will manage.
Given the very technical nature of this operation.
Is DOE currently equipped to manage all of these 38 contracts?
Based on my discussions with the PSAM, at this point they're not well equipped to handle it. But of course, if there's no choice, obviously
They have to
they
capacitate
have
themselves,
to
Mr.
find a
President.
way to do it. But at this point, the opinion of the PISAM is that they're not yet ready.
Okay.
They are not well equipped to manage all these contracts.
Okay, Mr. President. And maybe that's another reason why there's a need to extend, because the ultimate transferee is not yet capable of handling that, Mr. President.
Yes.
There's another, Mr. President, in the transcript, there's another item that I saw that PSAM is managing, 12 operations and maintenance agreements for non-power plant components of hydropower plants
Yes, that's correct.
that cannot be privatized per DOJ opinion. So this is now under PSAM. What are these 12 operations and maintenance agreements, Mr. President? What are the
Well,
nature?
these include like transbasin, well, very technical, but transbasing tunnels, apertures, the physical dam. These are assets that they're not power generated. They're components, but they're not. They're the non-power components of various
And PSAM currently is managing this, Mr. President. They're actively involved
managing the contracts.
managing the contracts, Mr. President. And who's the who is the physical manager of those?
The various energy corporations such as First Gen, Aboitiz, they're also the ones managing these non-power assets.
So there's no complication. I would assume that DOE will also, in an event that PSAM will not be extended, DOE will be the one administering these contracts, Mr.
Yes,
President.
that is correct. That is correct.
And then another item, Mr. President, is the administration of the universal charge. I know that PSAM is the administrator of this universal charge being distributed to SPUG areas and off-grid areas. Again, in an event that PSAM will not be extended, which entity of government can manage this universal charge?
I suppose, well,
Is it DOE again?
it can be directly to NAPOCOR, or DOE can be in charge of this. They would be the entities that would have the most technical capability to manage.
But NAPOCOR is also a recipient of that universal charge.
Yes, yes, but
So they'll be collecting and also
yes,
receiving,
they could-
administering
could
and
possibly
receiving.
administrate this also. It's
Okay, so NPC can be empowered to administer that, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'll jump to another question, which is the liabilities. In an event that earlier you mentioned that there are about 277 billion in terms of liabilities. In an event that there's a shortfall in paying off the liabilities, Mr. President, who will absorb the liabilities?
the national government, Mr. President. will
The
absorb these.
national government will absorb, Mr. President. I'll jump to this another topic, Mr. President, but related topic. This is on stranded costs and stranded debts, Mr. President. How much right now is the stranded cost and stranded debt? The remaining stranded costs and stranded debts.
It's remaining. Ito ba? Remittances? So what is this? These are collection.
Collections and safety. But if the question is how many is remaining, there can be no more new stranded governments because of the market.
Because of the Murang Kuryente Act, there can be no more stranded costs or stranded debts absorbed in the universal charge. So,
But the 𝗕𝗓𝗃𝗓𝗃 Act, Mr. President, is not being paid on time by the DOF.
yes, but
Correct, Mr.
so prior to that, the remittances for stranded contract costs were the collected was 80.9 billion, and then stranded debt was 23 billion. Although now they can no longer collect this because
of the 𝗕𝗓𝗃𝗓𝗃 law.
yes.
Yeah. So, Mr. President, unfortunately, DOF is not remitting the amount that is supposed to pay off stranded costs and stranded debts using Malampaya proceeds. And I don't know if the DOF will eventually reimburse. Actually, it has to be reimbursed because for now, it's PSAM absorbing the payment for stranded cost, stranded debt. In an
Yes.
event that I think it's every year they only allocate 8 billion, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think
With that,
about 8 billion. Yeah.
with that constant amount, how much will be the remaining stranded cost, stranded debt, Mr. President?
Every year.
Huh?
16 billion already, 8 billion a year over 20 years.
So that would account to 8 billion a year over 20 years, so approximately 160 billion.
And will the 160 billion be enough to cover all the stranded cost, stranded debt, Mr. President? Assuming that the 8 billion is a constant cash flow for the next remaining years, Mr. President.
That's 177 billion, that's 160 plus one of the numbers here.
Yeah. So what I mentioned earlier, the 200, there was already existing estimate for the amount that they would receive from the from the disposal of the assets. In addition to that, the 160 billion would be, if they were able to collect that 160, that would be combined with the liquidation of the other assets. It would be more than enough to cover the
Okay.
the remaining liabilities of
All right.
PSAM.
So the key, Mr. President, is really the liquidation of the assets,
Yes,
Mr. President.
yes, it would be.
Okay. So, Mr. President, in 𝗕𝗓𝗃𝗓, the liquidation of the 𝗕𝗢𝗢𝗙𝗥𝗕 hydropower plant, well, this is now one of the biggest assets that PSAM is holding right now. And I understand that the estimated value, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. President, is about 7 billion pesos for 𝗕𝗢𝗢𝗙𝗥𝗕.
Yeah, well, it ranges. Of course, again, this is depending on the valuations given, but it can range anywhere from, and this is quite wide, from 75 to 163 billion.
75 to
163 billion for the 𝗕𝗢𝗢𝗙𝗥𝗕.
Bakit maliit? Ang layo. 7 lang. Hindi, 70. Mali, 7. Ang liit nito. And Mr. President, I know that that the 𝗕𝗢𝗢𝗙𝗥𝗕 now has an O&M arrangement. Is that correct, Mr. President? There's a operation and management contract for 𝗕𝗢𝗢𝗙𝗥𝗕.
O&M ba yan?
O&M with NPC.
Yes, currently he has an O&M he has an O&M arrangement with NPC.
Okay. And Mr. President, will this be, I understand also that before privatizing this, PSAM needs to consult with Congress. Has PSAM consulted with Congress on the mode or on the opinion of privatizing the 𝗕𝗢𝗢𝗙𝗥𝗕 hydropower plants?
Yeah, well, they have consulted with Congress, and some certain, I guess there have been certain concerns that were expressed in Congress in previous consultations.
What are the concerns, Mr. President?
Of whether or not with the privatization, of course, there are concerns regarding the effects on the pricing, the price of power to the consumers. So that's something of concern to the representatives.
And Mr. President, if that is the case, 𝗕𝗏𝗄𝗛𝗚 will have a difficult time to be purely privatized. And when I say purely privatized, the total sell-off of the assets, Mr. President. And what other modalities is PSAM looking at in order to release this asset from their balance sheet, Mr. President?
Well, I suppose with regards to privatization, you always have to find, you're always walking that line, that fine line between maximizing the value of the asset and public, and of course, public interest. So there is a rehabilitation plan where the government will still retain ownership of the 𝗕𝗏𝗄𝗛𝗚𝗏, and a third-party transaction advisor will be procured for the rehabilitation project and to facilitate the updating of the FS. And the rehabilitation will be done in phases to limit the effect on the capacities. So, in other words, the government will find a way to retain majority ownership and rehabilitate it from various forms of fundraising.
But what's the exit point for PSAM, Mr. President? Because again, the mandate is to completely privatize it. But I understand that there are concerns by most especially Mindanao congressmen and Mindanao stakeholders about the privatization, and that privatization might lead to an increase in power prices. So what's the exit for PSAM? Because the point I'm driving at, Mr. President, is we don't want a scenario wherein after X amount of years, after 20 years or 25 years, we're back to the rationale of difficulty in privatizing the asset. So we just want to get an assurance or maybe some direction on how to privatize 𝗕𝗏𝗄𝗛𝗚𝗏 so that at one point in time, when the extension expires, it's already privatized.
You know, with this kind of with this facility, it will require some capital expenditures at some point. Otherwise, the service level will deteriorate. And even I think that is something that that's a reality that we have to that Congress will also accept. Perhaps at this point, it's just a matter of negotiation. We just have to find the balance between what. And maybe it's a discussion more on the rate that is acceptable to all, because I think the level of service, in order for it to be maintained, will require a certain level of capex, and I don't think the government will be willing, might not necessarily be willing to spend on that fully. So I think that this is just a matter of negotiating with the Congress and finding a price that is acceptable to all the parties concerned, because obviously it's always difficult, if not impossible, to have your cake and eat it too. We cannot have low prices and no capital expenditures. So
Correct,
I think
Mr.
that's something
President. I
that
agree.
we have to. That's a reality that I think everyone understands. Even here, I mean, in Congress, we all understand that, and it's just a matter of what is the acceptable price that everyone can agree to. So for me, it's a matter of. For this representation, it's a matter of a good negotiation. It may take a little time, but that's why we're asking for an extension so that they be given a little more time to complete their negotiations and dispose of the asset at a valuation that is acceptable to all.
And what time frame, Mr. President, is PSAM looking at to privatize 𝗕𝗏𝗄𝗛𝗚𝗏? I know that it's undergoing rehabilitation. It has an O&M arrangement with NAPOCOR so that the plant will be maintained, the plant will be as efficient as possible. But what's the time frame that PSAM is looking at?
Based on my talks with PSAM, they're looking at a time frame ranging from 5 to 7 years, 5 years to rehab, and maybe another 2 years so they can fully privatize it. So that's their estimate at this point.
Thank you, Mr. President. How about for the CBK hydropower plant, Mr. President? What is the plan and the time frame to privatize that, Mr. President?
Privatize it by April of next year.
In this case, they hope to privatize it by April of next year.
By April of next year. So that's completely off the balance sheet of
Yeah, with, most
PSAM.
likely, based on their targets, most likely.
And for the coal, for the Mindanao coal power plant, Mr. President, what's the time frame to privatize that?
Shut down. Early retirement in accordance with the promise of government for reduction in carbon credits. So it's early retirement. Medyo matagal ka lang lang.
Yes, it's at this point, the early retirement of the Mindanao coal-fired thermal power plant is part of the DOE's project under its investment plan to access financing from the Climate Investment Fund's Accelerating Coal Transition Program. So that's so they're trying to well, of course, the retirement of it, they can receive benefits for the retirement of the coal thermal fire plant.
So, Mr. President, the coal-fired power plant will not be privatized. It will be retired instead in exchange for
or carbon, some
credits, Mr.
financing from the Climate Investment Fund.
So that's the direction that the Mindanao coal power plant is taking, Mr. President.
Yes, that is correct, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, the only remaining, if the rationale, Mr. President, is to extend, if the rationale of the extension is to privatize the assets, Mr. President, so the only operating assets that needs time to privatize and that needs time to get public opinion on is the 𝗥𝗚𝗙𝗥𝗕 hydropower plant.
That is the major asset.
That's a major asset.
Requires a little more time to.
The rest property, I don't think you need to, there's no operation in that, Mr. President. Are there any operating activities regarding the property, Mr. President?
No, there are not.
So that can be easily transferred to the privatization council because it's just property.
Yes, the properties are a little more straightforward.
Okay. But, Mr. President, I have exhausted all of my questions, Mr. President, and thank you very much for your time in answering this representation's clarificatory question, Mr. President. And just to, again, emphasize that we're trying to find logic and value in the extension of PSAM. Value in terms of what can PSAM do more efficiently compared to the transfer of their activities to national government, Mr. President. So that's the track I'm taking, Mr. President, and that's also the rationale that we'll be focusing on, and will be greatly appreciated to receive information regarding the privatization council and all related materials, Mr. President.
We will expedite the delivery of the materials to Mr. President.
Thank you,
Thank you
Mr.
very much.
President. Thank you to the good sponsor.
Thank you, Senators Gatchalian and Villar. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2799.
Any objection? There being none, motion's approved.
Mr. President, I move that we consider proposed Senate Resolution number 1247, take into consideration proposed Senate Resolution number 1254. This is the resolution congratulating Reverend Pablo Virgilio-Sionco-David as the new Cardinal of the Catholic Church.
Is there an objection? Hearing none, consideration of proposed Senate Resolution number 1247 is now in order. The Secretary is directed to read the title of the resolution.
Resolution congratulating and commending the appointment of His Excellency Most Reverend Pablo Virgilio-Sionco-David, Bishop of the Diocese of Caloocan, as new Cardinal of the Catholic Church.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, I move to recognize Senator Risa Ontiveros, our Deputy Minority Leader. So move, Mr. President.
Senator Ontiveros is recognized to sponsor the resolution.
Salamat po, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, isang mapagpalang gabi. Kasabay ng ating paggunita sa ikalawang linggo sa panahon ng pagdating ng Panginoon, I join the Catholic faithful and other faith communities in witnessing and welcoming the kindness and favor that the Advent season brings to us. Nitong nagdaang buwan, naging saksi tayo bilang isang sambayanan sa pagtatalaga at paghihirang ng mga bagong obispo at tagapangasiwa ng Simbahang Katolika. Simula Marso nitong taon, buong kagalakan at puno ng pasasalamat na tinanggap lalo na ng mga maliliit na pamayanan ng simbahan, ang pagtatalaga at paghihirang sa katungkulan ng mga bagong pastol at tagapangasiwa ng iba't ibang archdiocese at diocese sa bansa, kabilang sina Archbishop Rex Alarcon sa Archdiocese of Cáceres, Bishop 𝗕𝗓𝗓𝗛𝗚 sa Diocese of Alaminos, Bishop Louis Oquiano sa Diocese of Virac, Bishop Rafi Cruz sa Diocese of Baguio, Bishop Juni Maralit sa Diocese of San Pablo, Bishop 𝗕𝗥𝗓𝗔𝗓𝗛𝗡 sa Diocese of Gumaca, Bishop Noli Bucco sa Diocese of Catarman, Bishop Eli Ayuban sa Diocese of Cubao, Bishop June Sescon sa Diocese of Balanga, Bishop June Andaya sa Diocese of Cabanatuan at si Bishop Ruben Labajo para sa bagong tatag na Diocese of Prosperidad sa Agusan. With a grateful heart, as part of the Catholic laity, I join our ecclesiastical communities in extending our congratulations and best wishes to our newly installed and designated Good Shepherds of the Holy Mother Church. It seems, Mr. President, with Advent being a gift that keeps on giving, nito lamang nagdaang Sabado ng gabi, on the eve of the solemnity of the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary, our country's principal patroness, we waited with great anticipation and joy, and one in prayer with the Catholic faithful around the world, especially with the Diocese of Caloocan, to receive the gifts of new cardinals, including the Philippines' very own Pablo Virgilio Cardinal David. As an expression of the recognition of the honor, and more so of the responsibility bestowed on the office of the cardinal, it is a privilege to introduce Senate Resolution 1247, congratulating and commending the appointment and designation of Bishop, now Cardinal Ambo, of the Diocese of Caloocan. Cardinal Ambo, a priest for 41 years, is the 10th cardinal to come from the Philippines, the 5th among our living cardinals, the 3rd among active Filipino cardinals, and the 2nd cardinal from the province of Pampanga, hence the preference to be called Apong Ambo, more than being styled as His Eminence. In joining the ranks of cardinals, the elevation of Cardinal Ambo constitutes many firsts, historic on their own, in the sense that he has become the first Filipino non-archbishop, the first from the Diocese of Caloocan and the same ecclesiastical province of Manila, and the first incumbent or sitting president of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines to be elevated to the cardinalate. Regardless, I believe that for Cardinal Ambo, the cardinalate is just another hat to wear, so to speak, Mr. President, and just a top-up responsibility for being the Bishop of the Diocese of Caloocan, the President of the CBCP, incoming Vice President of the Federation of the Asian Bishops' Conference, and a member of the Ordinary Council of the General Secretariat of the Synod. Even before Pope Francis's gentle reminder to the newly elevated cardinals to walk in the path of Jesus with humility, wonder, and joy, Cardinal Ambo has long been inspired by these acts of service expected of cardinals, walking with wonder as servants of the gospel, meeting others, and caring for those most in need. Lahat nga ng kanyang nakatatandang kapatid, ang public intellectual na si Randy David, na akin ring nakasama at naging kaibigan sa mahabang panahon. Si Cardinal Ambo, pansampu sa 13 magkakapatid, has always been a brother who offers a tight fraternal embrace. Cardinal Ambo, mindful of the sharp divide between the spiritual and the material, and between divinity and humanity, teaches and reminds us that God sent his only begotten Son to become man, to show the rest of us what it is to be human, to show that being human need not mean only being fallen, flawed, or sinful, but also that in the larger scheme of things, even mistakes contribute to the task of becoming human together. Kaya hindi po nakapagtataka na sa kasagsagan ng infamous war on drugs sa bansa, sa panahong nagmistulang killing fields ang Kamanava at may banta sa kanyang seguridad at sariling buhay, naging matatag si Cardinal Ambo para sa kanyang maliit na pamayanan ng Simbahang Katolika sa Diocese ng Caloocan, relentlessly pleading to stop the killings. Together with religious men and women and the lay people, Cardinal Ambo, as a pastor for the peripheries, created mission stations in the poorest neighborhoods, each with a makeshift chapel at its heart, to serve as spiritual sanctuaries for the then victims of drug-related killings, and now being sustained to meet the spiritual and existential needs of the communities. Central to the mission and ministries of Cardinal Ambo is the commitment to bring the church to the poor, being in solidarity, pakikibahagi, and with such attentiveness, pakikiramdam, to the needs of those in the peripheries, the lost, the least, the last, the vulnerable, the oppressed, and the excluded. At kung mayroon mang mahalagang aral si Cardinal Ambo bilang isang pastoral at spiritual leader ng bansa at sa pagtugon natin sa mga hamon ng bansa bilang lingkod bayan, marahil ito ay pakikiramdam, attentiveness, at pakikibahagi, solidarity, lalo na sa kababayan nating maralita, dukaha, at walang-wala. Or else, we'll end up alienating the people who need and trust us the most and marginalize ourselves in the end. Lastly, Mr. President, kasabay ng ating malugod na pagtanggap sa pagtatalaga at paghirang kay Cardinal Ambo at sa iba pang bagong pastol at tagapangasiwa ng inang simbahan, binubukas din ito ang paanyaya para sa sama-samang pakikibahagi, pakikilahok at pakikisaksi sa liwanag at pag-asang dala ng pagbubukas ng inang simbahan para sa ekstraordinaryo at banal na taon ng Jubilee 2025 sa pagtatapos ng Adbiento sa December 24 sa bisperas ng Pasko. Indeed, Mr. President, the Advent season is a gift that keeps on giving, and the hope does not disappoint in the time of the Jubilee. Maraming salamat po at mabuhay. Salamat.
Thank you, Senator Ontiveros.
Mr. President, next to co-sponsor the measure is Senator Joel Villanueva. I move that he be recognized.
Senator Joel Villanueva is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Majority Leader. Mr. President, dear colleagues, please allow me to give a short co-sponsorship speech. It is indeed a privilege to stand here today and recognize the newly hailed Cardinal Pablo Virgilio David. He has humbly received and wore his red hat with honor and dignity last Saturday, December 7, at the St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Cardinal David is now the 10th cardinal from the Philippines and the first to be appointed from a diocese, breaking the common expectation that most cardinals are chosen from archdioceses. It is truly spectacular, Mr. President, how the Lord moves and calls his people to fulfill his mighty work. Cardinal David is a man who lives by God's word. He is deeply convinced of the Christian doctrine, so much so that he has dedicated his life to making it known to his country and people. The faithful minister from the Diocese of Caloocan is a great example of a Christian and servant leader who always reflects on the question, Mr. President, yung WWJD, what would Jesus do? This is evident in the way he lives his life, with willing acceptance of his calling as God's servant and shepherd of people, standing firm and advocating for the rights of the members of his community. Throughout his ministry as a bishop, Cardinal David has consistently prioritized God and his responsibilities to the church. Now, as he embraces a new role, may he continue to live a life of faith and be an exceptional steward of the mission God has placed in his heart. Mr. President, I would like to put into the records that I wanted to say, Cardinal David, God is with you. And in the book of Numbers, chapter 6, verse 22 to 26, it says, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Maraming salamat po, Ginoong Pangulo. Maraming salamat, Cardinal Pablo Virgilio David, for answering God's calling. And we wish you well as you serve the Lord. And may God bless us all. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Joel, Majority Leader.
Mr. President, Senator Lauren Legarda and Senator Lito Lapid would like their co-sponsorship speeches be inserted into the record.
Together with this representation, Mr. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, no member wishes to interpret or propose amendments to the measure. I move that we adopt proposed Senate Resolution number 1247, taking into consideration proposed Senate Resolution number 1254, subject to style. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Being none, proposed Senate Resolution number 1247, taking into consideration proposed Senate Resolution 1254, subject to style, is hereby adopted.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2799 under Committee Report number 307. This is the bill creating the Metro Bataan Development Authority Act. So move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, assumption of consideration of the said bill under the aforementioned committee report is now in order.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measure is that we are in the period of interpellation, but there are no members who are willing, who wishes to interpellate. So I move to close the period of interpellation.
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2799.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Mr. President, I move that the resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2872 under Committee Report number 345. This is the bill on the National Education Support Personal Day Act. So move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, assumption of consideration of Senate Bill number 2872 under Committee Report number 345 is now in order.
Having sponsored the measure, I move to open the period of interpellation. Recognize the sponsor, Senator 𝗕𝗥𝗚𝗙𝗢.
Who is going to interpolate? Senator 𝗕𝗥𝗚𝗙𝗢?
Mr. President, no one registered to interpolate, Mr. President.
Mr. President, there being no other member wish to interpellate, I move to close the period of interpellation.
Is there an objection? There being none, the motion is approved.
No amendment. No individual amendments, Mr. President.
With no committee or individual amendment, I move to approve on second reading Senate Bill number 2872. So move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, Senate Bill number 2872 is hereby approved on second reading.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2872.
An objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Some admin matters, Mr. President. I move to elect Senator Juan Miguel Zubir as member of the Committee on Science and Technology, Vice Senator Robin Hood Padilla. So move, Mr.
Is
President.
there an objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, pursuant to Section 18 of the Rules of the Senate and upon instruction of Senator Alan Peter Cayetano as Chairperson of the Committee on Science and Technology, I manifest the creation of a subcommittee to deliberate on the following bills on the expanded Philippine Science High School System Act. Senate Bill numbers 2874, 2866, 2859, 2836 and House Bill number 9726 and such other bills which may be referred to the Committee on Science and Technology covering the same topic with Senator Zubiri as chairperson. I so manifest, Mr. President.
The manifestation is noted.
Mr. President, the Senate President would like to insert his co-sponsorship speech for Senate Bill number 2898, the bill liberalizing the lease of lands by foreign investors.
The co-sponsorship speech of the Senate President is hereby inserted into the records.
Likewise, Senator Lauren Legarda would like to insert into the records her co-sponsorship speech for Senate Bill number 2897, the bill amending the Safe Spaces Act.
The co-sponsorship speech of Senator Legarda, the aforementioned bill, is hereby inserted into the records.
We need suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Mr. President, this juncture, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2826 under Committee Report number 329. This is the bill enhancing the fiscal regime for the metallic mining industry. So move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, the motion is carried.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I now move to resume the period of interpellations and debate and recognize the distinguished sponsor of the measure, the gentleman from San Juan, Senator Joseph Victor J.V. 𝗕𝗏𝗙𝗔𝗓, our Deputy Majority Leader, and to interpellate the gentleman from Davao and Bohol, no other than Senator Ronald Bato Dela Rosa.
We recognize the sponsor, Senator J.V. 𝗕𝗏𝗙𝗏𝗏𝗏, and to interpolate, Senator Bato Dela Rosa.
Yes, Mr. President, we're ready to answer the queries of our distinguished gentleman from Davao.
Thank you, Mr. President, Majority Leader, and good sponsor. Mr. President, my first question is, for the record, can the good sponsor spread into the record the objectives of the proposed bill?
Well, the objectives of the proposed bill is to fix the fiscal regime, improve the revenues that can be derived from the mining sector, Your Honor, Mr. President, so that we can maximize whatever we can in the mining sector, Your Honor, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good sponsor. The sponsorship speech of the good sponsor mentioned that there is a need to correct the current mining tax regime that is fraught of complications. May we know that what these complications are and how can this be addressed by the proposed measure?
Mr. President, the rationale in enhancing the mining fiscal regime is to achieve simplification, fair share, and good governance to maximize the potential of the industry as a main driver of growth in the medium term. The government is also aiming to add value to the export of minerals. The reform will also institutionalize a transparency and accountability mechanism, ensuring that the companies make proper payments to the government, to the host LGUs or province, and neighboring communities. The mechanism will also help ensure that there are no revenue leakages.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good sponsor. May we know what is the current Philippines GDP from mining?
Average 0.60. Your Honor, Mr. President, the average contribution to GDP is 0.7%, Your Honor, Mr. President.
4.7?
0.7 only, 0.7%.
0.7. 0.7.
But in billions, it's about 150 billion pesos per year, Your Honor, Mr. President. 150 billion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good sponsor. So, what is the projected GDP from mining after the passage of the proposed measure? Are there local and foreign investors who intended to infuse capital in our country once this bill becomes a law? Mayroon pa ba talagang untapped investors or capital for mining?
Incremental revenue.
Yung increase.
In revenues every year is
Wala pa nadagdag, di ba?
Our plan is to become around 2% of GDP
So ito yung increase.
ng revenues every year.
Tapos ulo yung GDP,
The plan
2%.
Your Honor, Mr. President, the projected revenue increase when this mining fiscal regime is passed about 6 billion per year, and to increase the GDP to about 2%, no, from 0.7% at present, Your Honor. So 6 billion a year revenue, without adding ito at present the present mining operations, Your Honor. So not including the projected or the expected new mining firms that will be entering, Your Honor, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President, Your Honor. That would be a good source of revenue once this measure is made into law. So the next question is about the data on existing mining communities. How many mining communities do we have at present, and where are these located?
Pero yung mining, total ba tayo? Ha? Ang mining.
Metallic mine is the
Metallic.
large scale metallic
Ito, 574.
barangays.
Large scale na niya. Ang
Your Honor, Mr. President, the large-scale metallic mining covers about 574 barangays at present.
Thank you, Mr. President, Your Honor. Recently, there have been massive flooding and landslides in the country, which was attributed to mining activities. The most recent being the flooding in Rizal during the height of Typhoon Inteng. May we know which among the areas within mining communities have been identified by the Office of Civil Defense as flood prone?
Based on the flooding incidents that were reported during the recent Typhoon Enteng, and imposed on the geohazard map showing active mining production sharing agreement or MPSAs as well, only one flooding incident was recorded, Mr. President, near an active MPSA, which is Bagumbayan, Teresa, in Rizal. However, there is no flooding incident within the mining area. But regarding the MPSAs near the moderate to very high flood susceptibility areas, identified areas include Kalumpang, Santo Cristo, Teresa Rizal, San Roque, Angono Rizal, San Jose, Antipolo, Rizal, Kupang, Antipolo, Rizal, Mali and Pintong Bukawe in San Mateo, Rizal. Your Honor, Mr. President, I think these are Pintong Bukawe and these areas are familiar to us, Mr. President, because these are near at the foot of Sierra Madre. We do trail biking here, Mr. President. So I think you must be familiar in these areas. However, there were no flooding incidents near these active MPSAs, Your Honor, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President, Your Honor. Kung meron lang kayong data, I just would like to know how much is the budgetary allocation for flood control projects in these areas, and what is the status of flood control projects in these areas?
Your Honor, Mr. President, unfortunately, we do not have a data of the budget allocation for flood control projects because these are taken care of by DPWH, the favorite topic of my very good friend, Senator Joel Villanueva, wherein 300 billion total budget for flood control. So probably in this area, it's the DPWH, that would take care of the flood control, Your Honor, Mr. President. So it's not under the MGB or DNR, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. President, Your Honor. Kaya ko ito natanong kasi, Mr. President, importante na malaman natin itong data na ito dahil makakatulong ito sa ating mga policymakers to weigh in the benefits of our country of the mining industry in general. Gusto natin malaman kung gagamitan ba natin ang cost-benefit analysis itong industry na ito. Mas malaki ba talaga ang benefit ng ating bansa sa pag-promote ng mining industry? Bukod pa po ito sa benefit na binanggit ni Senator 𝗕𝗓𝗙𝗢𝗏 noong nakaraan, na isa sa positive effect ng mining operations ay pagkatapos ng extraction activities, the land may be viable for planting and or agriculture as compared when it was full of metallic minerals. Kaya Mr. President, tatanong ko, baka mamaya mas malaki pang ginagastos natin sa flood control kaysa income na nadiderive natin from mining operations. So kung sakaling lalabas sa per hour cost benefit analysis na mas kukunti lang kinita natin sa mining, mas malaki ang gastos natin sa flood control na dulot nitong mining operations, baka mas maganda pa siguro na huwag na tayo mag-mining para wala tayong flood control na projects na gagawin. That's my very basic na pagtingin sa sitwasyon, Mr. President, Your Honor.
Your Honor, Mr. President, of course, like you, I'm also a nature lover, no? We do trails because we enjoy the nature. But this measure, no, will be focusing on the fiscal regime, the revenues that will be collected. Since mining is already there, at least we can maximize whatever we can at present in the mining operations, no? And also, it's a fact that the Philippines is endowed with substantial mineral resources, positioning it as a significant player in the global mining landscape. The country boasts of the world's third largest nickel reserves at 31.4 metric tons, producing a substantial 400,000 tons in 2023 alone. We are also the 12th largest copper reserves at 39.7 metric tons, the fifth globally largest globally in cobalt reserves with 260,000 tons. And the Philippines is also a notable producer of gold, possessing 164.77 tons of gold resources and securing a place among the world's top 20 gold producers. So we still have a lot of potential because of our vast mineral reserves. We are very mineral wealthy. So that's it. And according to our data which I read recently in their mining areas in Rizal, there was only one incident lang. Only one incident of flooding, Your Honor, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good sponsor. Dito naman tayo sa mga, I don't know kung naitanong na ito ng mga previous interpellators about the health-related concerns. What diseases and the health-related effects have been identified in relation to mining? I don't know kung meron kayong taga-DOH na kasama dyan, ha, pero I don't know kung may record ang MGB nito.
Respiratory, mga...
Your Honor, Mr. President, common illnesses reported due to mining operations are upper respiratory tract infections due to dust exposure and musculoskeletal due to heavy lifting and continuous driving for surface miners. Occupational diseases such as pneumoconiosis, a lung disease caused by excessive dust inhalation, lacerations, cuts, and crashes, asbestos, mesothelioma, severe fibrosis, silicosis, fatal lung disease, skin diseases, emphysema, chronic obstructive lung diseases, and hearing loss. So these are the, according to data, the diseases that are commonly identified to mining, Your Honor, Mr. President.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. With that, ganong klase mga sakit, meron bang budgetary allocation for occupational safety and health in the mining industry? Kung meron, how much?
Nakalaan para dyan? May check-up din. Yes, sir. Ang company nag-assume.
Your Honor, Mr. President, as per approved safety and health program of mining companies, health control and services are allocated with sufficient budget and health activities, including the establishment of a clinic with medical practitioners and memorandum of agreement with the nearby hospitals, and likewise they conduct a regular checkup.
Every kailan? Annual or yung checkups na?
They conduct annual checkups for the mining workers, Your Honor, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President, Your Honor. I know that yung DNR, MGB, ay palagi ang gumagawa ng mga geohazard survey sa mining areas palagi. Pero may we know from the good sponsor kung talaga bang gaano ba sila ka sigurado kapag sila nag-conduct ng ganitong mga survey na walang mangyaring mga mining related incidents, mining related accidents na mangyari doon sa mga areas na talagang malaki ang mining. Because I just would like to cite an example, Mr. President, good sponsor, doon sa aming lugar po, sa Davao de Oro, mayroong large-scale mining operations doon sa barangay Masara, Mako, Davao de Oro. Wherein, alam ko, sinusurvey yun palagi, pero nangyari talaga na yung buong community ng barangay Masara, yung sentro, talagang bumuhos yung lupa ng galing sa bundok at tumalon yung lupa, para bumangga sa side ng bundok, tapos tumalon, tapos tinabunan yung buong community. So, ang daming patay, ang daming hindi na-recover kasi napakakapal na po ng lupa na nakatabon sa buong barangay. So, I don't know how effective, how efficient yung ating ginagawa ng mga geohazard survey sa mga lugar na ito. Dahil alam ko kung nakita ng DNR o ng MGB na talagang talagang bibigay anytime itong lugar na ito, sana na advise na yung isang village doon, isang barangay, na umalis na kayo dyan dahil pag magkakaroon ng malakas na ulan, siguradong bababa yung lupa dyan at talagang matatabunan kayo. May we know from the good sponsor kung yung effort ba nila dito ay satisfactory ba? Yung on the part of the MGB and the DNR?
Your Honor, Mr. President, according to MGB, that area is really identified as highly susceptible to landslide. And that is not in the mining operation, but within the MPSA area. No, hindi po siya sa mining operation. It just so happened, incidental, that the bus carrying the miners parked in that area. So talagang na-tsempo lang po, no? It is not part of the mining area operation, but it was really identified as susceptible to landslide. But it was a coincidence that it was incidental that the vehicle or the bus that carrying the miners parked in that area, Your Honor. Unfortunately.
Yes, Mr. President. Alam niyo po, pumunta ko doon sa area after that incident. Yung bus, isa lang yun. Actually, yung bus, nasa labasan ng kunti ng barangay at may nasave pa na pasahero doon. Pero ang hindi talaga nasave yung buong barangay na natutulog sa panahon na yun. Talagang pag wagam ng lupa, pagbagsak doon, tapos covered ang buong barangay. Nandoon yung eskwelahan, nandoon yung chapel, nandoon yung sentro ng barangay. Kaya sana seryosuhin ng MGB yung kanilang mga geohazard surveys para pag nakita na talaga nilang malapit ng bibigay, siguruhin natin na hindi tayo walang mangyari. Yun lang ang aking gusto iparating, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
although labas na yan sa ating sa taxation naman itong ating tinatake.
yes,
pero
revenue
revenue
and the fiscal regime on. But Mr. President, according to MGB,
that area is really susceptible. They have really identified it as susceptible and prone to landslide. Ang problema po, dapat ho yung LGU ang hindi po dapat pumayag na magkaroon ng housing or settlement area in that area that you were pointing out, Your Honor, Mr. President. Ang problema na nabahaya na po, may mga tumira, kaya lang it was really, according to MGB, identified as a landslide-prone area, Your Honor, Mr. President.
Correct, Mr. President. Although hindi naman natin talagang totally biniblame ang MGB or DNR sa bagay na yan, alam naman natin talaga na yung mga tao doon may katigasan din sa ulo. Talagang kahit na sinabihan na hazardous area, bakit the area, yung mga LGU na mismo nag-advise, ayaw pa rin umalis. Kaya siguro talagang whole of community approach ang gagawin pagdating sa ganyang sitwasyon. Mapunta naman tayo, Mr. President, Your Honor, dito sa yung declaration. Narinig ko yung interpellation ni Senator Joel Villanueva the other day na dependent tayo, no? Gusto natin lumaki ang revenue. Pero still, the government is very largely dependent on the self-declaration na ginagawa ng mga mining companies kung magkano yung taxable amount na i-declare nila. At to cite an example, Mr. President, no? Kahit na ito nga yung matagal, naobserbahan ko talaga ito Bakit itong, alam ko itong mga kumpanya ito kumikita ng napakalaki ilang millions of pesos sa mining, pero yung surrounding community parang hirap na hirap pa rin, parang hindi umaangat ang buhay. Dahil nga, sabi naman ng LGO, aside na yung ang tax nila, yung revenue, hindi na pupunta sa local, kundi sa national, ang isa pa yung misdeclaration, Mr. President. Alam mo, kung yung ginagawa dyan sa ibang mga minero, yung kanilang gold na produce ay, di ba, parang mandated by law na doon niya ibenta sa central bank. Meron ba tayong batas niyan, di ba?
Your Honor, Mr. President, that pertains to small-scale mining, Your Honor, Mr. President. Yung pong
How about the large scale?
Diretso binibenta.
Hindi sila mandated to sell to the central bank?
No requirement, Your Honor, Mr. President.
So saan sila? Anywhere, pwede sila magbenta kahit saan?
Except po yung Oceana Gold kasi yung renewal ng contract hindi siya diniport sa contract. Sa contract na 25% of their output should be to be yun lang po.
Oceana
Gold. Yung buwan na FAA.
Your Honor, there's one mining operator, Oceana Gold, which is an FTAA, which is mandated to sell 25% of their gold find, to the BSP, Your Honor. So ito pong isang large-scale mining, FTAA in fact, so ultra-large-scale to, that are mandated to sell 25% of whatever they would mine to the Bangko Sentral, Your Honor, Mr. President.
So, meaning to say, kahit na large scale, meron pala tayong polisiya dyan na nagmamandate sa kanila na magbenta sa central bank.
Your Honor, Mr. President, there's only one that was mandated because when it was renewed, it was part of the contract to that mandated them to sell 25% of whatever they would mine to the BSP, Your Honor. So it's only one.
Only one.
But by law, it's really just the small scale mining that are required to sell to the central BSP, Your Honor.
Okay, but yun nga, babalik ako doon sa punto na pinupoint out ko na paano natin talaga sila closely monitor yung income. Kasi ito kalikasan This is natural resources. Ito'y, how do you term that? Yung expendable, yung hindi maibabalik. Hindi renewable. Hindi to renewable resources, kundi
MGB.
basta mauubos. nauubos ito ng resources. Kaya once maubos ito, wala na talaga tayong income. Kaya siguruhin natin na bago ito maubos, enough revenue ang mapupunta sa ating gobyerno. Pero yun nga, yung declaration nila, sana, I'm just moving forward. The sponsor of this mission should also consider na hindi tayo maisahan, lalong-lalo na itong mga foreigner. Alam natin itong mga foreigner na ito, na mga kumpanya, pupunta lang dito sa Pilipinas to extract gold. Pag na-extract na lang gold, sibat yan, laya sa Pilipinas, bahala kayo dyan kung isahan lang tayo. Kaya siguruhin sana natin na yung makuha nilang gold ay talagang properly accounted at properly paid yung kanilang taxes.
Your Honor, Mr. President, before, at present, it's only the MGB, no, that is monitoring. But after the passage of this measure, it will now be all, the BIR will now be part of it also, so they can check on the financial statements, on the sale and profits. So, double check na po between MGB and BIR. But admittedly, talagang we will just be dependent on what they will be declaring, Your Honor, Mr. President.
How about, Mr. President, good sponsor, this just a wild suggestion. Ano kaya kung, anyway, large scale man ito, no? Malalaki. Ano kaya kung ang MGB magdedicate ng personnel na magbantay doon sa operations nila para malaman talaga kung ilang kilong gold yung naproduce para hindi tayo maisahan. May record talaga. Kasi kung mag-rely lang tayo sa kanilang declaration, ay iisahan talaga tayo ng mga negosyante na ito, lalong-lalo ni mga foreigner. Iisahan tayo. How about, kasi alam natin yan, yung processing ng gold nila eh. Bantayan lang doon. May tao tayong taga-bantay. Pwede kaya yun? Is it feasible?
Region. Every shipment meron.
Your Honor, Mr. President, according to our resource persons, that every shipment that is shipped out has to be signed by an MGB personnel, Your Honor, Mr. President.
Isa lang ba? Ilan na, ilang personnel? Amin, ilan? Isa lang ang nagbabantay?
Kada shipment, sir.
Ilan nga? Ilan nagbabantay? Ilan ang nag-validate?
Dalawa, sir, dalawa.
Dalawa, MGB pareho?
Your Honor, Mr. President, according to them, that there are 2 MGB personnel that validates and signs each shipment, Your Honor, Mr. President.
Pero, Mr. President, good sponsor, atin-atin lang. Bilang Pilipino, siguro, honestly speaking, no, yung 2 tao niyan, malulusutan pa rin, di ba?
Your Honor, Mr. President.
Bato, baka marinig tayo, atin-atin lang.
Wala naman nakakarinig, tayo lang eh.
O malulusutan pa rin, di ba? Ako, mukhang malulusutan pa rin. Kayang-kaya.
Well, according to them, that it is well documented and there's a receipt. But you know, Your Honor, Mr. President, I know what you are talking about. It happens in most government agencies, Your Honor, Mr. President. Hindi lang siguro dito sa mining industry sa MGB, no? Maraming maraming palusot dito sa bansang na ito, no? If there are if we think that there are safety nets or measures that we can do so that we can improve the monitoring and the auditing of these materials that are being shipped, then probably we can take some amendments or recommendations, Your Honor. Talagang dito lang, kahit shipment na papasok, minsan may tinatawag na, may pinapainom yata minsan. Correct. Yung mga trader na pampabulag o pampalabo na matay, Your Honor, Mr. President. So ito yung mga dapat siguro nating hanapan ng paraan o solusyon if you have any recommendations on how we can double check. Because at present, we are only reliant on MGB personnel, 2 MGB personnel to do the validation and to sign the shipments. At ang problema pa nga daw nila, they lack personnel at times, no? may kulang pa raw sila ng personnel sa dami po ng mining sites, 500. So, yun po yung dilemma po nila they're facing right now.
Thank you, Mr. President, Your Honor. Alam mo, masahit ko lang as an example, no? Yung small-scale miners na mandated by law to sell their gold produce to the central bank ay hindi nila sinusunod. Alam ko, bulag palagi ang ating gobyerno pagdating sa taxation dito dahil yung small-scale miners, they're claiming to be small-scale miners, but actually they are large-scale mining operations using the small-scale mining law. Ginagamit nila para hindi sila pakialaman sa ang treatment sa kanila ay small-scale miners. Pero actually, large-scale mining operations ginagawa nila at kilo-kilo ang gold na produce nila. And instead of selling their gold to central bank, para properly accounted yung ating natural resources, ay talagang in-smuggled out nila ito sa Hong Kong, sa Singapore. Talagang nilalabas na yung gold nito. At pag lumabas ito sa bansa, wala na. Hindi na natin accounted ito. Kaya sana, yun lang ang aking gusto sana na hindi tayo maisahan, Mr. President.
Your Honor, Mr. President, according to our resource persons, that they already submit a proposal or a draft to amend the small-scale mining law, precisely to be able to distinguish yung small, medium, and large-scale mining, Your Honor, Mr. President. So, it's good that you have brought that to the attention that marami ho talagang marami talagang papalusot, and I think we really have, aside from the mining fiscal regime, we really have to tighten to make sure that our natural resources are not exploited. And if ever, kaya nga po natin ginagawa ito, this is not an amendment of the Mining Act, but really to increase and to improve the revenue. Kasi ako rin po, personally, I'm not really keen on mining kasi pareho tayong nature lover, pareho tayong nagtitrail kasi we love nature. But we're hoping that at least we can get we can maximize, no? And we can get the best value per shipment of the minerals that is being extracted. That's why also, Your Honor, Mr. President, under this measure also, we are create more yun, no? Yung sa processing, create more yung under the create more, Your Honor, Mr. President, the measure that we passed, we are incentivizing mining operations that have processing. So, at least mas binibigyan natin ng incentive yung mga nagpo-process ng minerals, hindi lang po yung nag-extract and export, Your Honor, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President, Your Honor. Alam mo po, Mr. President, Your Honor, nalaman ko itong mga diskarte na ito na mga mining, either small scale or large scale. Nung former President Joseph Estrada, ang presidente natin, when he declared a moratorium on mining operations doon sa Mount Diwalwal, ako yung pinadala niya doon na mag-control sa operations, mag-implement ng moratorium. During the time of President Estrada, I was then police major and I was the battalion commander of the Regional Special Action Force. At doon ko nalaman na ganun talaga. Kasi pag nalasing na yung mga miners, doon na, lumalabas na yung kwentuhan. Paano nila nalulusutan ng gobyerno? Paano nila naisahan ng gobyerno? Magyayabang yan pag nalasing na. Kaya sana we have to learn from these people para hindi tayo maisahan. And yun lang po ang tanong ko, Mr. President, Your Honor, and I would like to thank our good sponsor for answering our questions today and for enriching the record of this august body. In closing, I would like to reiterate my concern on the environmental impact of mining activities, which should be treated with the utmost importance and priority. More than anything, Mr. President, it is the humble opinion of this representation that the welfare of our kababayans and the corresponding impact in the environment outweighs whatever financial incentive that the country will benefit from the mining industry.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good sponsor.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor, Mr. President. At least we learned a lot from you also in your experience, no? In fact, our country really has a lot of gold reserves. Just to give an information, ito pong small-scale mining, unfortunately, they are exempted from tax. They are given this incentive so that they are forced to sell the gold to the Bangko Sentral, Your Honor, Mr. President. But it's sad to know that marami pong nagpapanggap na small-scale miner, but as you mentioned, they are not small in operations, Your Honor. So I guess we really have to look into this also in on another measure, Honor, Mr. President. Thank you for your interpellation, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Interpellation, Your Honor, Mr.
Thank
President.
you to the good sponsor, Senator 𝗕𝗢𝗙𝗪𝗏, and to the interpolator, Senator Bato Dela Rosa. Don't worry, atin-atin lang po to.
Konti lang nakarinig at
Konti lang
nakapanood,
nakarinig
Mr.
po
President.
ito.
Mr. President, at this juncture, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2826. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Wala namang gagawin. Mr. President, at this juncture, I move that we consider Committee Report number 370 pertaining to the alarming cases of kidnapping, disappearances, and the recent spate of crimes in the Philippines. And to sponsor the measure, I move that we recognize Senator Ronald Bato Dela Rosa, Chairperson of the Senate Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, the aforementioned bill is now in consideration.
I move for my previous motion that we recognize.
We recognize Senator Bato Dela Rosa.
Thank you, Mr. President. Majority Leader, thank you. Mr. President, my esteemed colleagues, magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. As chairperson of your Senate Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs, it is my honor to present Committee Report number 370 on proposed Senate Resolution numbers 194, 195, and 370 of Senators 𝗕𝗏𝗙𝗙𝗪𝗏 and 𝗕𝗏𝗢𝗏 Jr., respectively, taking into consideration the privileged speech of Senator Grace Poe delivered before this August chamber on December 14, 2023. It may be asked of this representation, what took the committee this long to come up with a committee report? The answer, very simply, is timeliness. Had we rushed the drafting and filing of this report, it would most likely have been premature to do so. I say premature because we would have ended it on a note of indignant protest and objection. Isang committee report na naghahayag ng matinding pagtutol sa kriminalidad na dulot at dala ng mga sindikatong nagtatago sa likod ng mga pugo. But because your committee has chosen the road less traveled yet more prudent, one of waiting and analyzing subsequent events as they emerge, we are able to submit and present a committee report that ends on a note of sobering acceptance of the challenge as well as of the opportunity. But then again, I am probably getting ahead of myself. Nevertheless, I believe the saying still rings true. It is good to begin with the end in mind. The resolutions of Senators 𝗕𝗏𝗙𝗪𝗏, and 𝗕𝗏𝗢𝗏 Jr., as well as the privileged speech of Senator Poe, delve into the disturbing reports of missing persons, violent crimes, and the alleged involvement of Philippine offshore gaming operators in these illicit activities. Agad nagpatawag ng mga pagdinig ang inyong komite at nagsagawa ng mga investigasyon. Our investigation revealed a complex and troubling situation. On one hand, official PNP data suggested a decline in overall crime rates for the period covered January 1 to September 20, 2022 as compared to previous years. On the other hand, we were faced with the proliferation of disturbing videos and reports on social media, testimonies from concerned citizens and organizations which painted a different picture, one of fear, uncertainty, and a growing sense of vulnerability. We could not ignore these concerns. Every victim of kidnapping, every act of violence, every life lost is one too many. After all, we have a duty to ensure the safety and security of all those within our borders, Filipinos and foreign nationals alike. Our committee's inquiry was able to confirm the undeniable link between POGOs and criminal activities, including kidnappings, human trafficking, and even murder. Looking at POGOs, we initially saw an opportunity for revenue, while foreign crime syndicates saw an opportunity for their expansion. And so, despite the often touted economic benefits of POGOs, we quickly discovered that a thriving economy can never outweigh a threatened nation. Acknowledging this, we came to ask what is the price we have been made to pay for allowing POGOs to continue. And are we still willing to afford it? Following the report of our humble committee, allowing POGOs to continue and proliferate has come at the cost of our peace and order, and no, we are no longer able, much less willing to afford it. Your committee has made administrative and legislative recommendations. Administratively, we recommend the following, among others: the close coordination between and among the Bureau of Immigration, PAGCOR, PNP, NBI, DOLE, in relation to the ongoing phase-out of POGOs. The Secretary of DOLE should diligently exercise their visitorial powers, conducting ocular inspections, evaluating compliance with labor standards and occupational safety requirements. For the PNP, it should be good for them to regularly implement Oplan Sita, allowing them to inspect and verify the identity of random foreigners, especially in identified kidnapping-prone areas. They should also undergo foreign language training courses. Number 4, Republic Act 11917 or the Private Security Services Industry Act must be effectively implemented, particularly in relation to the licensing and training of protection agents, that they may not be used as accessories to criminality. The following are some of the legislative recommendations. Number 1, Congress should consider passing proposed measures that seek to modernize the Bureau of Immigration so that we can better ensure the effective implementation of our immigration law. Number 2, Congress should conduct a review of the requirements in the issuance of the Alien Employment Permit or the Certificate of Exemption, Exclusion, as laid down in Labor Advisory number 16, series of 2021. Number 3, the possibility of amending the Data Privacy Act must be studied, particularly in relation to the acquisition of CCTV footage, photos, guest profiles, hotel booking records, and other documents essential to the investigation of kidnapping or abduction cases. Number 4, Congress should also review the implementation of the firearms law to make sure that foreigners shall not be able to hold and use firearms here in our country. Here is where we may return to my first point. There is a timely character to the submission and presentation of this committee report. I say this because we now find ourselves at a time when the Senate committee, as well as the President himself, take a similar stance against these POGOs. Why only now? Well, to answer this question, the time is now because the Committee on Ways and Means, chaired by Senator 𝗕𝗥𝗚𝗏, has reported out Senate Bill number 2868 under Committee Report number 342, which I also co-sponsored yesterday. This report seeks to eliminate once and for all the operations of POGOs in the country. The time is now, Mr. President, because the Committee of Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality, chaired by Senator 𝗙𝗧𝗙 Hontiveros, soldiered on for 5 years it conducted hearing after hearing and finally concluded with a last hearing on November 26 of this year, bringing to our awareness the many sinister ways by which POGOs had been used for the selfish interest of criminal minds. And of course, the time is now, Mr. President, because the President of the Philippines himself has called for the total ban on POGOs, first as part of the State of the Nation address delivered last July 22, 2024, and second, through the issuance of Executive Order Number 74. For years, we have allowed foreign gambling on our shores, and in doing so, we too gambled that doing so would be worth the risk, that it would result in more revenue, in employment, and more benefits for our economy, that it would be good for us ultimately. But while we clung to the chances that we were right, Mr. President, we were gradually made to confront the sad truth that the cards were dealt incorrectly, and that in the end we can never gamble away that which we are not willing to lose: revenue for the price of peace, economy at the expense of dignity. We refuse to allow this unfair exchange to continue. Your Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs firmly stands for this nation. The Philippines is not and shall never be a safe haven for criminals, regardless of their nationality or affiliation. We ought to restore public trust, strengthen our law enforcement capabilities, and uphold the rule of law. In the end, our safest, surest bet is still on the side of our people. That in itself is already a win. Daghang salamat, Mr. President, at magandang gabi sa ating lahat.
Thank you. Thank you for the privilege speech, for the sponsorship speech. I like the word win. Ang narinig ko kanina.
Not
My
just
favorite
win,
word.
Mr. President, win-win.
Yan ang ano.
And Mr. President, to allow our colleagues to study further the committee report given to us by our dear colleague, may I move that we suspend consideration of committee report number 370. I so move, Mr.
Is
President.
there any objection? Hearing none, the aforementioned bill is hereby suspended.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. At this juncture, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, December 11, 2024. So move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, the session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, December 11, 2024.